Joint meeting of the Finance Committee and the Select Board, Thursday, January 11th, 2024. We will start with open forum. If anyone has anything that they'd like to announce. Nope. Okay. So we're going to go on to our first agenda item, which is a 705 agenda item, a reserve fund transfer for the water enterprise, and we have Mark Warren. Thanks, Mark. Can you just walk us through?
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Okay, so yeah, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Warren. I'm the water superintendent. I think I've met most of you, but that's who I am. This is about PFAS. I'm sure that most of you are aware that the water department is pursuing PFAS treatment at both of our plants, PFAS being a drinking water contaminant. Whenever a water supplier wants to go ahead and change treatment or add a treatment, we're required by the DEP to perform what's called a pilot study to test that treatment out. Our particular pilot study has two phases. One's called the side stream, where we're actually diverting some flow at our forge plant right into the test columns. The other phase is more of a bench level thing. So what we did was we put together a pretty comprehensive pilot study proposal, submitted it to DEP, and that's what our original $91,000 budget was based on. However, they came back with substantial sampling and analysis additions as conditions of approval. And that's what changed that initial $91,000 budget to $113,000, which is a $22,000 increase. Again, that's based on conditions put into the study by the DEP. Also, they required us to sample both our forge plant and our country road plant at a higher frequency. Just so you know that the country road well is the well that we've seen most of our PFAS contamination. So DEP felt that for an added level of protection, we should be sampling not only the country road well more, but our actual forge plant more. So in other words, the finished water we put into the system comes from the forge plant. Okay.
Brother Junior Warden, Worshipful Master. You'll call the craft and labor.
Sorry, that was one of our attendees that was not muted. They are muted now.
Okay. Anyway, so where was I? Right. So our funding is what we did. We started the pilot. Okay, so the pilot's running. It's up and all the equipment is installed. So we did have enough money to start the pilot. We don't have enough money to finish the pilot. So that's what I'm coming to you for tonight, is to obtain those additional funds so that we can fund the entire pilot. This whole process, we feel like there's a sense of urgency to it. The EPA, any day now really, they should have done it in December. They're going to finalize their new drinking water standards. And once they finalize these new lower drinking water standards, all water suppliers are going to have a period of time to get into compliance with those standards. So right now we are in compliance with mass standards. We won't be in compliance with EPA standards. So in order for us to get through the state revolving fund process, which we are involved in, we are on the intended use plan, so the state has accepted our project, but we need to get this pilot study done so we know what kind of filter media we're going to use. And lots dependent on that. The size of the vessels, the size of the footprint of the actual plant itself are all dependent on what type of filter media we use. For example, carbon tends to use bigger filter vessels. We might need a bigger footprint, things like that. So I guess that's my story.
So you're requesting $27,000 from the water enterprise
Emergency reserve, correct.
Reserve fund. And yes. What's the balance of that fund currently?
It's $250,000. So every year it's $250,000.
Okay. Anyone have questions?
Question?
Dennis?
You mentioned that the DEP has approved the test.
They have.
Is the state provided any money at all for this to help?
No,
Anyone else?
that would be great.
Wouldn't it?
I have a couple questions. That state revolving fund, what is that? I'm not familiar with that.
Sure, so it's a mechanism for water suppliers to get low or sometimes no interest loans. And to get involved in this program, it's a yearly program. It rolls around, it's revolving, so it revolves once a year. So we submitted a project application several months ago, and the state finally approved it recently. So now the next step is for the water department to request appropriation at the March town meeting. And if we get it, we can apply for an SRF loan, which is a low interest loan. And
That's for the installation, like once
The
you get through this
construction.
pilot, this is construction, okay.
Correct.
Okay.
The pilot study we're funding from capital.
And are there any grants available?
Not really. I mean, Westford's considered an affluent town. A lot of the grants and
They haven't seen this,
yeah.
they haven't.
And zero interest loan eligibility is geared towards that type of thing. We are involved in a multi-district litigation for PFAS, so that's going to help. How much it's going to help, I don't know at this point exactly. I have an idea, but
Okay, any other questions before I entertain a motion?
Just a
to
quick
approve?
follow-up.
Sure.
That won't change borrowing requests, that'll just change the final number, basically.
Correct.
It would provide some relief against that final.
correct. And this, this study, I'll tell you, the study itself is very fluid. Okay, sampling is based on breakthrough of the filter media. Okay, so the sooner it breaks through, the more samples we have to collect, the more expensive it is. If the PFAS doesn't break through the media that rapidly, we may end up saving some of this money. But we need to be ready for that circumstance.
Sorry?
So, during the collection analysis, will the cost change based on the outcome of the analysis, like if it is favorable, less favorable?
Yes, it will. So if we get a non-detected, that will eliminate the need for some sample collection. In that respect, it could affect the outcome of the ultimate cost.
So the current budget you requested is to consider the worst case scenario or the realistic case scenario?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it could be better or worse, but we are approximately there, that's what.
It probably won't be worse, but it might be better.
Okay, good to hear. And
You all set? And want to make a motion to approve the reserve fund transfer?
I'll move it.
I
Second? Okay, we have to do a roll call because we do have two people online, so I'll start at the end. Ingrid?
Aye.
Heather?
Aye.
Dennis?
Aye.
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 Sorry.
Aye.
I'm an aye. Shelby?
Aye.
And Beth?
Aye.
Okay, so that passes unanimously. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. I'm gonna stay here.
Okay, so now for the highlight of this evening, the introduction and review of our budget. I just want to do a quick intro and then Kristen's going to take us through some things. So tonight starts our budget hearings. We're going to be analyzing Public Works, the library, and the water enterprise, recreation enterprise, stormwater enterprise. The way this will go for anyone who's online, as each of the department heads make their presentations, which is going to be a brief description of the two budgets and the differences, FinCom members and select board members will have a chance to ask questions. If anybody from the audience, whether you're here in person or you're online, if you would like to ask questions, if you're in person, stand up. I don't think we have a mic over there, so just kind of raise your hand or something, and we'll get to you. If you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature. So I'll turn it over to Kristen for an intro.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Again, my name is Kristen Last, Town Manager. This is my first time presenting before you as the budget updates. I was able to listen in to all of your Finance Committee public hearings last year, so but I do understand this will be going a little bit differently than your past years. Wanted to just start off with a few slides to level set. I know you as Finance Committee members may have seen these slides on Tuesday night at the Select Board meeting. However, would like to show them again for those who were not watching on Tuesday evening. And these slides are an abbreviated version of what you saw the other night. So Dan, next slide. So, and for the fiscal 25 budget, again, like I said before, we have prepared 2 budgets, and I'll get into that in a moment. So, an overview of what you'll hear this evening and you'll hear over the course of the next 2 months is that in December of 2022, we were made aware that some major contracts up for renewal for fiscal 25, so starting July 1st of 2024, indicated that we would see some cost jumps between 10 and 40% based upon inflation. In January of 2023, the Select Board, School Committee, and Finance Committee started to meet individually as their own board and committees or as a whole to highlight some of those potential challenges and bring those to light and into the conversation. In May of 2023, those challenges that we will see presented this evening and the next 3 evenings were coming into clearer focus, and the Select Board had the foresight to create a budget task force to review those budget challenges, potential revenue, and potential efficiencies for the town of Westford. And all of these here have links because they link you out to various meetings or reports, so anyone who's watching online can grab this information from the packet. In October of 2023, the Budget Task Force issued their report and their findings, which is quite substantial. I carry this around now with me wherever I go because we're constantly referring to the Budget Task Force report, which identifies in great detail the budget challenges we're seeing, the revenue potential, and the efficiency potential that we could outcome. In October of 2023, the Select Board and School Committee heard that report and then subsequently requested that I as town manager and Dr. Chu as superintendent of schools prepare 2 budgets. One being a budget that would meet the needs of the community but would require an override, and one with significant cuts that would meet our Proposition 2.5 limit. And by Proposition 2.5, we are only allowed to raise our tax base by 2.5% per year plus new growth. And Dan and his team have prepared a number of informational videos that we'll link to in a further slide here that you can get some more information on what that means. In December of 2023, myself and Dr. Chu presented our various budgets to the Select Board and the School Committee respectively. Those were 2 budgets that we were presenting. Now we're in January of 2024 and leading into February of 2024, where the Finance Committee will lead a bunch of detailed public hearings to review those budgets and to gain input from the public. In March of 2024, we will finalize those budgets. The Finance Committee and the Select Board will provide their recommendation, and ultimately we'll go to town meeting for a vote of a budget or budgets, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then in May of 2024, there will be a town election. If the Select Board indicates that they would like an override, that override would go in that town election. Next slide. So I want to highlight for the Finance Committee and members of the public watching the variety of budget challenges that we are seeing. We're seeing that inflation has been and continues to be at a generational high following a period of very low inflation. We're seeing that our energy, service, and labor contracts are increasing due to that inflation and due to other measures. The town and school has a commitment to competitive pay, which means that we benchmark ourselves against area like-minded communities, and we target the middle of that benchmarked pay. We're seeing rapidly growing health insurance expenses. That's because of the industry and the market, as well as our experience from our users is very high at this point in time. We are seeing that there may be some new revenue opportunities on the horizon, but it will take some time. At town meeting and leading up to town meeting, there'll be more discussions about MBTA multifamily housing and how that might have a significant portion to new growth. And also we're looking to contract with an economic development consultant. But Proposition 2.5 presents real constraints that will drive deep service cuts. And I want to just indicate, and this is not a separate slide, but Westford is not the only municipality considering a Proposition 2.5 for their fiscal 25 budget. The town of Arlington has already passed a 2.5 override for fiscal 25. Groton is considering, Acton is considering, and Dracut is considering so far. We are very much ahead of those towns because our town meeting is in March and many of the other town meetings are in April and May. So I do want to indicate to the Finance Committee and members of the public that Westford is not alone in this inflation period, and we are seeing other municipalities having very similar challenges. Again, we've linked here to the Budget Task Force report if anyone would like to review it or re-review it. This slide gives a benchmark of where our fiscal 24 budget started at, 128 million approximately. The increases that we're seeing over the course of fiscal 24 to fiscal 25, going from left to right, solid waste, recycling, electricity, natural gas, and non-union salaries, labor contracts on the town side, school labor contracts, health insurance costs, school bus contract, special education tuition, and other increases that we've identified through our budget task force work and the development of the budget. I'm not going to show this slide in this medium today, but we also have other slides that show that we will not only see a challenge between fiscal 24 and 25, but those challenges are forethought between fiscal 25 and 26 and 26 and 27 due to these contracts. I want to be very clear that the town is taking this extremely seriously, and through the forethought of the Budget Task Force and other department heads and other participants, we are actively engaging in what we could provide through efficiencies and revenue. We are looking at fleet fueling at the DPW garage across all departments. Now it is very piecemeal. We're looking at centralized fleet maintenance opportunities. Again, it's very piecemeal at this point in time. We're looking at our fee structures across all departments and how we compare to the market and our market basket communities. The health department did adjust their fees for any of their applications most recently, and the ambulance enterprise increased their rates as well. We're looking at composting services. The town contracted with Bootstrap Composting to attempt to reduce our solid waste tonnage, and that project became available to residents in early December. We're also working with the recycling committee to understand how we can communicate to residents on reduction of solid waste. We're looking at MBTA zoning and how we can appropriate new growth and bring vibrancy to the town. We look at technology integration. What are we currently using for technology? How is that serving us right now? Are we using software or other technology in ways that really is across the platform, or are there areas where we can actually drop some technology that's not being used over time? We're looking at shared service agreements, both internal, which means between town and school, and external between other municipalities. And we're continuing to monitor and examine our health insurance opportunities. I do want to bring to the forefront that we also are fully aware that there are many people who cannot afford increases in taxes or have other hardships, and we do have resources available through our town assessor's office. I won't go through this slide in detail, but want to make sure that the public is aware that there are certain exemptions or tax deferral options that people can explore, and our assessor's office is more than willing to help people through that process. We're still looking at the several budget variables as we continue to develop the budget and walk through the budget. As you know, the state budget will not come out until next week or the week after. New growth is variable. We're trying to track that as best we can. Our solid waste and recycling, again, is variable due to the tonnage that is put out and the recycling markets. Our infrastructure and facilities are aging, so we need to continue to monitor those costs that are required to upkeep our facilities. There are ongoing public safety needs that we need to address. Our energy costs are variable, and we're currently reviewing what we can do to save energy through an Amoresco energy contract and investment grade audit. We're looking at how we can be more energy efficient and sustainable. We are currently actively cleaning up 12 North Main Street through Brownfields grants through state and federal, looking to get that property ready for disposal for a private investor or private developer. Our hotels, meals, and excise tax actually have finally come back to pre-COVID levels, so we're proud to say that, but hope that those continue to increase over time. Our snow and ice deficit is based upon the weather. This week has not been kind to that, but hopefully we'll see how this winter unfolds. The town was given notice last week that we do have a fair share apportionment from the millionaire's tax coming in for highway operations purposes. However, that will be variable over the course of the years as well. That is based upon the taxes that are come in from the state, so that is not something we can control. And then we're also obviously interpreting and understanding what an override versus a no override budget would mean for the town for fiscal 25 and beyond. So I want to highlight the next steps for members of the public who are watching. We're in the thick of public hearings with the budget, with the Finance Committee tonight and the next 3 Thursdays after that here at Town Hall and via Zoom. The Select Board will be reviewing the town meeting warrant, which the budget will be one on January 23rd. There'll be a series of meetings that we'll be holding to go to area area events and groups to give budget presentations and answer questions. We'll be then setting the order of the article with the Select Board, having an open forum, hopefully twice within this period, once earlier on in early February and then again in March. Obviously, annual town meeting is where the budget is voted on, and any registered voter is welcome to come and vote. Any resident is welcome to come and attend and listen. And then if an override is on the warrant and would be on that ballot on May 7th for our local election. And then we wanted to have a slide on how the public can stay involved and signing up for these agendas and attending Finance Committee meetings. We created a special budget website, which is brand new this year. It had been all over the town website in various locations, so the budget is in a very centralized location right now as you enter the homepage. Please feel free to email me, and anything can come through me to go to the Select Board or Finance Committee members. As I alluded to in the early comments, we have a variety of educational videos of what municipal finance is, what these terminologies are, what it means for the resident, and what the budget task force findings were. And then more importantly, attending town meeting in March of 2024. So that concludes the slides. I just want to make one additional comment. Generally, after the Finance Committee has had their public hearings, there has been very little changes to the budget made because the budgets were so tight. The budget is extremely tight again this year, both scenarios, to be honest. But we are taking all of the comments that come from the Finance Committee, all of the comments that come from the public extremely seriously under these conditions. We'll be reviewing those comments, myself, Chair Clay, and the Select Board, and we'll be preparing an updated budget for recommendation by the Finance Committee and the Select Board going into town meeting based upon that feedback and based upon the policies that the Select Board wishes to be setting. So I want to be really clear about that this is not just to listen to department heads and answer questions back and forth. We're taking your feedback very seriously and adjusting as necessary. So that's all I have for this evening. Thank you.
Anyone from the Finance Committee have a, Dennis?
I would just like to add to the comments that Kristen just made. I've been a member of the town of this particular Finance Committee for 7 years. Also been an active member of town meeting for almost 40 years. And I can tell you that I think the budget situation that we're facing right now is the worst I have ever seen in that time. And I've always maintained that the most prudent level of government for handling our finances is our local government, and I still believe that. However, we have a problem in the sense that it's not always the case with both our federal and state government. And what I'm seeing here is much of the problem that we're dealing with is being generated by problems and difficulties that have been created from outside. whether it be healthcare, whether it be energy, whether it be fiscal issues, state aid, state mandates. So I just wanted to say to the members that one of the things that we're going to have to decide is, and don't forget, in addition to us, there are people outside that are feeling the same stresses, is how much of this we're willing to pass on to the taxpayers. So I would suggest that we have two-pronged type of a approach to this. Number one, we have to do our homework in the sense that we have to look at every town program, we have to look at every service, we have to consider the service providers and make sure that they're getting a fair shake, and then we also have to look at the taxpayers. And at the end, the decision process will require us to make ask some very hard substantive questions about the people who are coming here. We're gonna have to try to, and this is about pain, there's pain in this budget, there's no way around this, this is gonna be a painful time. We have to make sure that we try to minimize that pain as much as we can, and the last thing we need to do is, if we come to the conclusion that some pain has to be transferred out, that it's done equitably and fairly to everybody. And that's all I just wanted to say. But you have a very hard first year to really break in, so.
The jackpot.
Yeah, same thing with Sinji. What a way to begin.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. So let's jump right into our first item, which is under public safety, the tree warden, and we have Kyle Fox. So this one's pretty small, Kyle. I'm not even sure that there's very little difference. If you just want to give us a quick,
Yep.
what the difference is and the reason, and then we'll go to questions.
Sure, very good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kyle Fox. I'm the Acting Director of Public Works. With me tonight as we go through these budgets is Mark Warren, Paul Sterrett, and Larry Pinero. For the tree warden budget, in the proposed override budget, personnel services increased by $62, reflecting non-union cost of living adjustment and a flat budget for operating expenses, resulting in a 0.14% increase. In the non-override budget, it reflects an additional $10,000 decrease in contracted services, which is a 25% reduction. This proposal reflects a 23% decrease in the overall budget.
Any other questions? We do ask questions ahead of time just for the public, and so we've gotten answers back from those. So if nobody has follow-up
Which are
issue,
also,
And they're on the li-
they're
they are
in the
online and
packet.
they're in the packet. Mm-hmm.
Are they on that budget page too, or just in the finance?
The packet is linked off the budget page.
Okay. No questions? Select board, anybody? Tree warden?
Beth has a question.
Oh, Beth. Go ahead, Beth.
I was wondering what the cost of the tree keeper software was. I think that was like eliminated in the budget, so I was wondering like what that software is used for, what impact that would have.
Thank you, good question. The software has an annual user license cost of $2,500 per year. What the software does, the town invested through a grant last year in a survey of 2 areas of town, identifying the public shade trees. And this software provides an inventory of those trees, so we can see things such as condition of the trees, locations, and those kind of items. The idea, I believe, was moving forward to expand the survey to the rest of the town. Obviously, given the budget constraints, we didn't consider that for this year.
And that was just in the non-override scenario, that you would remove that?
Correct.
So if the override, you would want to continue that?
Yeah, we would keep the software. We still would not expand the database in either budget, but in the override budget, we would keep the software active.
If you were to relinquish the software, would you keep the data somehow with us? Because at some point, if you want to re-enable the subscription, we can start off where we left instead of just starting from scratch.
Yeah, I believe we would be able to. I'm not certain, but I believe we would be able to keep the data. Of course, the one caveat is the trees are a living asset, and they change over time. So without doing updated inventories, the data would get stale, over a period of years anyway.
Go ahead.
Just another follow-up on that. So in the response for reducing that extra $10,000 was reduce risk tree maintenance and removal. Does that then turn around to be a liability for the town? Like, would that be potentially an impact on insurance?
It is potentially, yes.
If we don't have any questions, we'll move on. No.
So, given the risks and everything, if at all possible, I like to keep that.
I would just make notes to yourself
Okay.
now, and then we'll kind of figure that out as we go along. But
Yeah.
if nobody has anything else, we'll move on to Public Works, which is also Kyle.
Excellent. So yeah, Public Works budget 405 in the budget book. In this budget, personnel services increased by 2.1%, or about $5,780 as a result of cost of living increases for non-union personnel and a longevity increase for the DPW director position. With the resignation of Director Cronin, the proposed budget could be reduced by $850 in that longevity line. Office supplies also decreased by $100 to reflect recent spending trends. In the non-override budget, personal services decreased by almost 14% to $38,000, or by $38,000 to reflect salary of the part-time post-retirement employee currently working in this position. This employee is only permitted to work a maximum of 1,200 hours per calendar year, and this would become an issue after the employee is permanently retired if we plan to hire a full-time replacement. Office supplies expenses decreased by $100 again to reflect current spending trends. As in the override budget, the budget as proposed could be reduced by $850 in the longevity line item.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? I had a question about the business manager. So it's a part-time position now. Why wouldn't it continue as a part-time position?
I can answer that.
Okay.
So it's budgeted as a full-time position. It has been for several years now. We believe that, and the person in the position now, so I don't want to talk about people versus position, but the person in the position now is a retiree and is limited in the work hours. Our understanding is that there's actually additional work that can be done by this business manager that is not being done today, and that can enhance that. So we want to keep the hours as a full-time position, because we believe that there will be continued to be work for this person in a full-time capacity when this retiree chooses to depart.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I think my questions are for a little further down in some of the other areas. You want to keep going?
The engineering department budget, budget number 410. Personal services is proposed to increase by 2.1%, or about $5,800 as a result of cost of living adjustments for non-union personnel. And the office supplies expense line item was decreased by $100 to reflect current spending trends. In the non-override budget, equipment maintenance is reduced by $500, which is a 50% decrease in that line item. And meetings and conferences is reduced by $1,700 to a balance of $300. Overall, this budget in the non-override scenario proposes a 1.49% increase.
Dennis?
I have a question for you with regard to, in your report, you talked about the goals, and there were several projects that are pending. One is Pond Road and Blue Book Road, stormwater funds. I think there's others that involve sidewalks at Plain Road, Nutting Road, and at Texas and Carlisle Road. Am I correct?
Correct.
Let me ask you a question. If worse came to worse, can those projects be delayed? Or what would happen? I mean, how far along are they? How committed are we to those projects?
So the two drainage projects, and feel free to have Paul jump in for more specific details. The drainage projects are, I believe, out to bid or pretty close to going out to bid. Certainly with the rain we've had this year, there's drainage issues all over town. So certainly the impact to not doing those projects would be continued risk of culvert failures, which we've had 4 since September 11th. Sidewalk projects, on the other hand, although we've spent a lot of time and energy and working with residents to get easements, could they be deferred? They could.
I just roughly, and I don't expect an exact amount. How much money between those 4 particular projects alone? How much money roughly does that entail as far as commitments to the town?
I would have to defer
Okay.
to Paul on that question. I apologize.
So, yeah, and I can offer that, and Dan can help me with this. This is not from free cash or operating. That these were appropriations from capital. Is that correct, Dan?
That's correct, Paul.
Okay, good.
Well, no money would be available unless it was turned back and town meeting reappropriated it.
If I could say something.
Sure, go ahead. Larry?
If I could say something on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Those projects are funded by the stormwater enterprise, I believe.
The drainage projects are, the
Yeah, the
sidewalks.
culvert projects, yes.
The sidewalk projects are through the general fund. That we have debt payments earmarked that we've been carrying for Plain Road and Carlisle Road in the budget for years, but it's just, we always complete the project first before we permanently borrow. So Plain Road Phase 1 and Carlisle Road are actually in the budget right now, and we've earmarked funding for Plain Road Phase 2 in the FY25 budget.
And this is the non-excluded debt.
No, exclude that. So for the $600,000 project for Plain Road Phase 2, we're looking at about $43,000 in additional debt payment in FY25.
How much was that, Dan?
43?
100.
So, in other words, if there was an issue of withholding on these, we'd have to go to town meeting for a transfer, is that what you're saying? If we want to put a hold on any of those projects, we would have to do it at town meeting, or would the authority be within the purview of the town manager, or?
So the town manager would recommend the capital plan to town meetings be included. So it's kind of tricky with the override situation where we're borrowing here. We have to build in the capital project, and then, it's up to town meeting whether or not they can actually approve it. So, but the debt payment is budgeted in the debt service budget.
We're advertised in opening bids next week, the 18th, for the 2 culvert projects. And tomorrow, the town manager and us are meeting with Newport Materials to consider mitigation on the sidewalk projects.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
So regarding the meetings and conferences, the money is very little, $1,700 change, right? I have 2 questions. What usually is the money spent on meetings and conferences? What type of activities? And the second thing is, how much did we spend in the last year and the previous year? The reason I'm asking is because when we cut something that's so deep, it kind of tend to impact something. So I just give me a feeling of, because I told what I'm looking for here, and explain me.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's a great question. In fiscal '23, no money was actually spent in that account. However, typically it would be, and it's used for various conferences to network. A lot of times those conferences will double as trainings to help with professional development hours for the professional staff.
Okay. And if you would ever need a statutory requirement to do such training that costs more than $300, that could be done by a fund transfer or something, right?
I mean, they can spend within their
Oh, okay,
expenses,
within the,
but,
okay.
yeah.
New bottom line.
Okay, thank you.
And that would be our first course of action, would be to try and underspend a different line item to be able to allow for that training.
Beth has a question online.
Beth, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, the culverts that have failed with the last few storms, is that something that we could get like emergency funding for from the state, or how are those projects covered when we have like emergency culvert failures? And if we're not maintaining our infrastructure, I would assume we're gonna have the potential of more of that, and with climate change, it's gonna be increasing more and more with drainage issues. So I'm just wondering if that's a higher cost than the pre-planned projects that you have already in the budget.
Yep, thank you. So the storm on September 11th that damaged the East Prescott culvert was declared an emergency for the county, and we have submitted paperwork to FEMA for reimbursement. So hopefully we will get significant reimbursement on that project. The storm from December 18th, I've not heard whether it's going to be declared an emergency or not. If it is, we would submit the paperwork for that project as well. Actually, 2 culverts would be under that project. Aside from that, the projects are paid out of the stormwater project fund. There's emergency money in the stormwater budget for just these kinds of projects.
Go ahead, Heather.
Because we're kind of on this topic right now. Do the state roads get taken care of for drainage and that sort of thing by state dollars? Or
They do.
They do.
Yep. So the money we spend out of our budgets are only spent on municipal public roads.
So I drive like down like 27, and I'm noticing, because I have a student driver, there's not a lot of drainage on some of those state roads. There's not like a lot of grates and that sort of thing, but we have to do it on our town roads?
Yes.
But they're not doing it on their state roads?
Yep.
So to be clear, Paul Starrett, town engineer, Powers Road is the only state road. Route 27, 225, those are not owned or maintained by the state. They were part of the county transfer. Those are town-owned and operated roads. 110 is the exception to that, Littleton Road. And you don't see drainage on 27 and 225, that's basin type drainage, because country drainage or open flow drainage off to the sides of the road.
So the only state roads are 110, Powers Road, and maybe this little stretch of Boston Road?
Correct.
Half of Boston Road, yeah.
Anything else? You guys, anything? Okay. Why don't we move on to highway?
Thank you. So the highway budget, 421 in your budget books. The proposed FY25 highway budget increased by $32,885, or 1.62% from the prior fiscal year's budget. This includes an increase in personal services of about $57,000, or 4.13% due to cost of living increases for department personnel, and an increase in the unscheduled overtime line item. Similarly related to increases in employee salaries. Highway department expenses decreased by 3.81%, or about $24,000, in response to recent spending trends and continued utilization of the Newport Materials Asphalt Agreement. In the non-override budget, personal services would decrease by a little over 1%, or $14,000, over the prior fiscal year's budget. This includes the elimination of 1 heavy equipment operator position in the highway division. Expenses decreased by an additional $875 over the override budget due to a reduction in the uniform allowance line item resulting from the eliminated position. Highway operation service levels would be ultimately impacted by this choice, resulting in delayed response time for plowing services and deferred infrastructure maintenance. The non-override budget proposes a 1.94% reduction from the current fiscal year budget.
Questions?
Just to follow up on the potential reduction with a non-override. I don't believe I saw an increase in overtime ask. Are you confident that if that position was eliminated, that we would not see additional overtime exceeding your
Yeah,
ask?
so I don't foresee an increase in overtime, largely because our non-winter overtime is based just on emergencies, and unless it's a widespread disaster, we typically wouldn't have the full crew in for a non-winter emergency. And of course, winter emergencies are covered generally under the snow and ice budget. So for that reason, I don't think we would see a large increase in any overtime costs.
I noticed in your presentation, there were, under diesel fuel, I was tracking the values that you had here. It appears that the diesel fuel is, at least in 2024, went down, and it's back up to 87,000, whatever. Are you confident that the diesel fuel is going to maintain itself at that level? I'm surprised that there wouldn't be more of an increase.
I have a little history on this. So, diesel fuel prices shot up pretty high back a couple of years ago, and that was before we had after we had finalized the 24 budget. During FY23, we did go to the select board knowing that fuel prices were escalating quickly and we couldn't afford it within the current appropriation. So the select board did appropriate funds for both the town and the schools to fund gasoline for a year. We still have part of that appropriation left that we can utilize in FY24. So if we go beyond the 45,000, we have that money there that can supplement different departmental budgets for fuel.
So there's a reserve for it? Is that what you basically?
Yeah.
So, and the other thing is, I noticed on resurfacing material, I'm assuming that's the material that you use to conduct resurfacing operations on the roads and things like that?
Yes, the smaller projects.
Now, that's reduced from 20 to 5,000. I mean, it's a significant reduction.
It is. So what we looked at was when I was preparing this budget, I did a 5-year look back and kind of average costs, and then used kind of a common sense look at where we were going. And because of the mitigation agreement, we really haven't been utilizing that line item.
Newport materials?
Exactly.
Okay.
So because of that reason, we haven't needed the full amount of that, and we thought, given the budget constraints, that would be a good place to scale back.
You're pretty reliable that that's going to make up the difference for you?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the last question I have is, when you talk about uniform allowance, do you I've never noticed. I've seen the fellows out there working, but do they get a uniform, or is that just to replace clothing that's worn and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's an allowance for them to purchase appropriate clothing for work. We don't have a uniform service.
Okay, thank you.
Heather, did you have a question?
Thank you for answering all my questions today. I know it was last minute. Just want to follow up on something Dennis said. What is the assumption in the budgets for fuel costs?
Give me 1 second. I look.
Okay,
I don't want to be wrong here.
move on. And then I think I worded one of my questions today poorly. But what I'm wondering is, does one employee cover more than one plow route? You said there were
No.
20. So it's one.
Yeah, so in town we have 27 plow routes. We break up the town into 27 pieces. One of them is all the down hall parking lots. So on our roads, there's actually 26 plow routes, and we have 26 different trucks operating during a storm.
Okay, that was part of my next question, because I'm trying to wrap my head around the number of trucks,
Yep.
the number of employees, and the number of routes.
Yep.
So you have enough trucks for each route and enough employees for each route?
No, and that's why we supplement with contracted help.
Okay.
We have a variety of contractors that cover various routes, both from the private sector, and we utilize water department staff to help out as well.
So how many contractors do you use?
We have, I think, 5 routes covered by contractor.
And if we did the non-override, you would need a 6th.
Yes. And I will say and we see it all over the state, with the state advertising for help and every municipality advertising for help. Contracted support for plowing is getting increasingly difficult to find and increasingly expensive to procure.
And then one last question, two more, actually, sorry. When does Newport expire?
So I believe it's a 10-year agreement, so it's not in the outlook here in the budget, but it's based upon a 10-year from when they started, and I believe they started providing materials to the town in 2020, but we can get you that information.
And then, in the fair share millionaires tax, you said it goes to highway. In particular, any line items?
So it's more like the Chapter 90, so it's to use for road improvement projects or sidewalk improvement projects. It is not for operating purposes.
Can that be used for salary as well?
No.
Or just?
No, just projects.
But that would be operating. Just a quick follow-up on the routes. My understanding is that your operators can only work within certain constraints of hours as well. So it's not like we can say, we have 27 routes now, next year, we're gonna break into 25 routes. Is that accurate to say?
Legally, it's not, because snowstorms are considered emergency events.
Okay.
We're not subject to the driving restriction rules. However, you take a storm like we had Saturday into Sunday, and the crew came in about 10 o'clock Saturday night, and they didn't leave until end of workday Monday. They're certainly strained by the longevity of these storms. Decreasing positions would make that worse.
Right. So even though legally you could extend them, putting human factor in there, we should not. We're asking again for more risk of failure.
Without a doubt.
Thank you.
But this last storm that you had, you were short 3. Did you have contractors to make up for it?
We did.
Because I will say,
So
it
we
was
had-
an excellent job. I
The-
put my
the
kids
crew
on the bus
yeah.
and went to 2 other towns, and they were nowhere near as
The crew did an
good.
amazing job, but we did. We had contracted support, and we were lucky to have 2 town retirees come and work for us for that storm as well.
Just to follow up on Heather's question, regular fuel was, we instructed departments to budget $4 per gallon, and for diesel, $5 per gallon.
Just a quick follow-up on that. Is the town subject to the road use tax on the fuel we purchase?
Calling the bulk, do you know if we, yeah.
Well,
You have to pay the
not in
gas
New
tax.
Hampshire.
Yeah.
You have to pay the gas tax though, I think, don't you?
I think it's, so we fuel our vehicles from several sources. So we have the tanks at the highway garage, which is under contract, so I believe we're tax exempt from that.
That's
We
the one I'm
fuel the
specifically.
fire apparatus at fire headquarters, which I believe is exempt from that because that's a contract. Then we use what's called WEX cards at gas stations for town hall, we'll call them town hall vehicles and police vehicles. I know there is a discount. I don't know if it's the price of the tax. I don't believe it is. That is why we're looking to fuel all of our vehicles up at the highway garage and go forward with that efficiency.
That was, thank you, that's where I was going with that. Thank you.
Those WETCO cards, we got to the bottom of after a couple of years of asking. It's cents.
Yeah, it's not
It's
much.
insignificant.
Right. And fuel in Westford is extremely expensive compared to other locations.
If anyone else, I have a couple of questions. So in the non-override budget, you're proposing a reduction of 1 heavy equipment operator. And you said that the impact of that would be a decrease in the level of service the division could provide. Could you give us some examples of what exactly that would look like?
Sure, definitely. So I'll talk primarily about the summer maintenance work that we do. We maintain over 150 miles of roads, 11 bridges, 3 dams, over 3,400 catch basins, culverts, ditch lines, detention ponds. You name it, we maintain it. Not utilizing overtime, to Tom's question, to get these services done. We end up deferring a lot of maintenance that we should be doing. A comment was made about culverts failing and not maintaining those. That's part of it. Because we don't.
Wouldn't the culverts be part of stormwater or no?
They are. Yes, they
The
are.
manpower is.
But it's our highway guys that are doing the work. One half of one position is budgeted through stormwater. But, so anyway, so in a non-overtime or non-contracted services model, which is generally how we operate due to budget restrictions, we just end up deferring the work. Another big one I should bring up is tree pruning and roadside mowing, which is one that, you know, everyone feels the effects of when you get midsummer and you can't see around the corner for the next intersection. So those are the kind of events that we don't get to do as the routine maintenance, because we're focused on more of the emergent work.
Yep.
And the higher priority work.
Okay, I guess further in some of our questions, we were told that there were several open positions currently. Have those positions been open for a while? I'm just sort of wondering how you're doing with, I believe it was 7 vacancies across Public Works.
Yeah. So over the past year, we've had a really good year hiring, and we're in way better shape this winter than we were last winter. That said, we do have a few positions, 3 positions open currently in highway. We're in the process of making an offer to one operator. We're in the recommendation stage of a second operator, so we're hoping to have those 2 positions filled sooner than later. And we'll keep advertising for the last position to get full. Our parks maintenance group is full at this time, and
how long have have those positions been open? Let's say specifically the highway positions.
So there's been 2 HEO positions open since for a year. I can't speak earlier than that because I wasn't here.
Okay. All right.
So can I just follow up? Is the one remaining then the supervisor?
Yes, and once that gets filled, presumably by an internal candidate, then it would trickle down to an HEO position
So you
being
would-
open.
Okay, so, okay.
Anybody else have anything for highway? Okay, let's sorry, Tom.
I have
Yeah.
two short
Yeah, go
questions.
right ahead.
Well, one's really for Dan. So are there any items currently on the capital list that could be paid for out of the additional Chapter 90 funds that we're going to get?
There's a whole, yes, I would say.
Okay,
Yes.
because what I'm wondering ultimately is if, I mean, in general, you can't backfill operating funds. You can't backfill operating funds at all with Chapter 90, but if we can offset part of what we've allocated to capital, that may free up some of the dollars we previously allocated to capital for some other use. So do you have a sense about how much that is?
There's a lot of DPW vehicles that were listed on there, and we had some projects as well. So a good amount of projects are there that could be offset.
In our next meeting, if you could tell me how much of the how much we could sub out with Chapter 90 funds and pull back to do something else with.
Yeah, we'll work with Kyle on discussing that and see what's possible
Would
there.
that be a 1-year relief, or would that be?
It's a,
Just
well,
heads up.
the millionaire's tax will keep going, but we don't know how much it's going to be. So there's some, I wouldn't know how to forecast it.
Yes.
It's variable, but it does roll over, so if we
Yeah.
didn't use the whole apportionment, we can roll it over to year to year.
Don't take any relief we can get.
Well, I just
Couple hundred
want to
thousand
make
bucks.
sure that we don't literally kick that can down the road of now
If
we
it's
have a
one
bigger
time,
deficit.
yeah, exactly. If it's one-time money, we want to know. So I don't think it's one-time money, but I don't know what the forecast is. So one of the big budget task force recommendations was the refueling and maintenance consolidation, which you're working on, which I appreciate. Because this is a multi-year problem and we have to be able to understand as much as we can about the future. Can you give me an estimate of how much we expect to save by doing away with the WEX cards and moving to centralized refueling? And same question for maintenance.
So I can answer the fueling. We would see about a $40,000 per year savings.
Okay. So I'll take that. I'll buy some
Maintenance, I don't
cookies.
think that we've had that level of overview yet.
How much, I mean, do we know how much we spend across all the departments on nickel and dime maintenance that we do with local vendors?
We can get that.
I don't have that, but I can get that for you.
I think I understand not wanting to forecast the savings in this fiscal year because you're still working on it. We have to have a ballpark for the future years because we have decisions to make about what we're going to do in the out year. in '27. Okay, so at the right time, I'd like to see those. Thanks.
All right, one more. The 4 vehicles that are being requested through capital are $148,000 in the budget, and I'm just wondering, I guess when we get to that, I'll ask how much of that is interest versus the other, but, I mean, would you prefer a vehicle over a head if it came down to that, or is that, I mean, it goes through capital, but because it's being funded as debt, it does impact the operations to the tune of almost 150.
I guess I don't know that I could give you a clear answer on that tonight. Certainly, I think you were at the capital presentation. The vehicles we're proposing to replace are 20-odd years old. We currently have one 6-wheel dump truck that's out of service that was proposed to be replaced by the truck that was approved at town meeting last year. Due to the time frame for procurement on anything now, it's over a year to get a big truck now. So I'm hesitant from that standpoint. Additionally, at the town meeting last year, the voters approved replacement of a pickup truck, which hasn't arrived yet. Again, same thing. We put out the proposal in April. We ordered the truck in April, and we still don't have it. That truck, due to rotting frame, is now out of service. So from when I met with you folks at Capitol back a couple months ago, we now have 2 vehicles completely out of service because of their age, and I fear these other vehicles are close to being there as well. It's a scary proposition for us with the age of our fleet.
And by deferring that, you run the risk of having a body that can't run a truck when we really could use it during a storm or
True.
something else. So,
Yeah.
it's like I said, it's a hard trade-off.
I think my concern is also that it's just an operating expense as opposed to being paid for, like historically, out of free cash.
Just to follow up on your other question on the interest on that, and 148,000. So the principal's 120,000 because it's 1.2 million over 10 years. So the difference is to 28,000 in interest.
Say that number again.
28,000
Per year.
per year for 10 years.
Beth has a question.
Beth, go ahead.
I was just remembering a question from someone I heard around town is how would sidewalk clearing be impacted in this budget? I know certain neighborhoods were clearing the sidewalk, and is that going to continue, or would that be eliminated with this budget?
The budget as proposed would maintain service levels for sidewalks, which is currently performed by a contractor.
Both budgets do.
What's that?
Both budgets do.
Yes. Yeah, because that comes out of the snow and ice budget. We've recommended the same funding from fiscal '24 in that budget.
Okay. Anybody else, or can we move on to snow and ice? Okay. Snow and ice.
So kind of stealing the thunder from myself in that one. The snow and ice budget remains unchanged from the prior fiscal year's budget. By statute, the town is allowed to overspend snow and ice budget, and whatever we do budget, in 1 year, we're never allowed to decrease that amount. In fiscal '25, we have an additional $400,000 earmarked in free cash to fund any deficits we have in the snow and ice budget.
So you just said that the clearing of those sidewalks is in the snow and ice budget. If we wanted to remove that, are you saying we can't?
No, we could.
Okay.
We just can't reduce the budget line item, the
Okay.
400,000.
400. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone?
I just want to make sure I understood that. So what's the mechanism?
So we have a base budget, which is 400,000, which has been that way for years. We're not allowed to decrease that amount. Otherwise, we're not allowed to deficit spend that budget, which puts us in a very large bind.
So the reason we know it's going to be 800 and we
Yeah.
chronically under budget is that if we don't under budget, we can't.
We're stuck.
We can't,
Right.
we can't overspend.
We can increase
That's
the budget.
perverse.
Yeah, but we
Okay,
just
I
can't put it
understand.
back, so, but, you know, over the past 10 years, I'd say the actual spend has been between 525,000 and 1.2 million, depending on the winter we have.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on snow and ice? Can we move on to streetlights?
Streetlights. Thank you, that's the 424 budget in your books. In fiscal '25, the streetlight operating budget increased by 15,000 or 60% from fiscal '24. In fiscal '24, the town factored in the remaining credits from National Grid that originated from the streetlight retrofit project when they went from sodium lights to LED lights. Once the credits expire, which we're expecting that to happen in this fiscal year, we expect the expenses to increase. In the non-override scenario, the budget is reduced by an additional $10,000. Typically, light repairs and replacement are completed as soon as practically possible using an outside contractor. With a reduction in this budget, non-critical repairs and replacements would need to be deferred until alternative funding sources could be obtained. Overall, the non-override budget is proposed to increase by 20% over fiscal '24. And I did want to mention in this budget, because it was so similar to the previous community I was in, the costs prior to the LED retrofit to post-LED retrofit was about a 50% savings in both communities. So even though this budget is proposing to go up by the lack of credits, overall from previous budgets, it is still down about 50%.
Go ahead, Hari.
Not budget related, few interesting questions for me. How do you know if a street light is gone bad?
Normally, we'll get a call from the resident in the area,
Okay.
or the police will let us know sometimes because they're out patrolling at night.
Okay,
If it goes bad, if the light sensor goes bad, then we'll see them during the day as we're out and about. They're called day burners.
got it.
So that's the two ways we generally figure it out. Additionally, we do have software that our GIS guru Chris does get pinged in certain scenarios when the lights are out.
So in override scenario, you would go and replace as soon as possible, and in a non-override scenario, it could be delayed. Or
It could be, depending on how many happen, the
Okay.
prices of the replacement, what the replacement is. Is it the whole fixture? Is it just the sensor? So it would depend on what our current year costs were.
So for the delay in replacing a particular light bulb, during that time the street will be dark, and if somebody gets injured or involved in an accident, would the town get any additional liability on that, or we are clear?
I think it would depend on the incident. I can't say for sure.
But it's still an interesting conversation of, is it critical?
Right.
Because it's, the street light at my house is critical to me, right? So,
Right.
so that
And
puts you in a bind.
streetlights are a funny thing. We had a request last week that I'm looking into from a resident for an additional street light. And it's not an uncommon request, but it's always been interesting in my career when those requests come in. One person will want the light, the person on the other side of the street probably does not want the light, and we sort of get caught in the middle.
Right.
And so we try to rely on policy for those kind of decisions.
I just have one, and then I'll let you go. The replacement and the repair of those lights, is that done by an outside contractor?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
We use the same electrician that maintains our traffic signals.
Okay. And do you call them out as soon as you have something, or do you kind of wait
We
and
don't.
have them come in?
We
once in a while?
generally wait because they're in Maine, so we try and give them at least half a day's worth of work when they come out, just to make it worth.
Are they the only
worth their
people
while.
around that can do it, or
There
is
aren't.
everybody local?
They're really the only one around that's economical for the traffic signal side of it, and just as part of the relationship, we couple the services to stretch our budget.
What kind of problems do you have? I mean, I remember when we talked about this years ago, that, I mean, these are fairly new, they were designed to have a long life. Like, what goes wrong with them? Like you said, I mean, the sensor, but I mean, shouldn't that be, it's just, I'm surprised to hear you have so many issues.
I wouldn't say we have a lot of issues. We have minor issues, like any electronic product. Some fail sooner than they should. Others last much longer than they should. But given the quantity of lights we have around town, you're bound to have some failures. I haven't heard of any in this community yet. I shouldn't say yet. I haven't heard of any in this community. In my previous community, there was vandalism on some lights too. You know.
So we spent like almost $7,000 in 2023. Is that like 2 lights? Was that 70 lights? I'm just curious.
I can get that info for you if you'd like.
Thanks.
Anything else on lights? Okay, let's go into waste collection and disposal. Dan, are you doing that?
Sure, I can do this.
Okay.
All right, so I guess most of you probably know our contract with Acme Waste Systems was set to expire at the end of FY24. You know, they have been with us since I believe 1989, providing that service pickup, and we knew this was going to be a budget challenge starting off early when they didn't submit a bid, because they've always provided the lowest cost services whenever we have gone to bid. So that was identified by the Budget Task Force as one of those challenges. At the same time, we did couple up our recycling contract with Waste Management to expire at the same time, so we could go out together and try to really get a good deal on that. So we did go out to bid this past fall. The initial bids came in, and we were looking at a tune of about a $1.8 million increase for FY25. We didn't stop there. We went back out, and we actually contacted E.L. Harvey, who wanted to submit a bid after the fact, and they were willing to do so. And so after negotiating with them and you know, going back and forth many times, the price increase came down to about $320,000. I will say that $1 million of that initial $1.8 million was to buy bins for everybody throughout town. We no longer have to do that with E.L. Harvey, so they can accommodate our existing bins that we have, which is great. So overall, it's still a large increase from fiscal year FY24 to 25. It's $320,000, and that was after negotiating with them. So part of this is we used to have separate recycling and solid waste budgets. That even this year we have those. Since we're under one contract, we decided to combine these into one budget, which is going to make life a lot easier for us. I'm actually more excited than I should be about it, just for combining a budget, but it's going to be a lot easier to administer for us. It's just one bill a month for picking up both recycling and the solid waste. And then we do have a lot of variability within this budget. So you know, the solid waste tonnage goes up and down. It's been on a downward kick for a couple of years. I think one of the FinCom questions was asking, like, what's the reason for that? And reached out to a couple of people, and our best answer was that, you know, people are back at work and not working from home anymore. And the public outreach and education, people are being more conscious with what they throw away these days too. So, so we have seen those tonnage totals go down. So at the end of the day, this is still a $320,000 increase. The budgets are the same in the override and non-override situations here. In the non-override budget, it takes up about 88% of the new revenue that's being apportioned for the town budget in FY25.
Do you want to fold in, Dan, some of the Budget Task Force findings about Westford's solid waste generation per resident versus our neighbors? And
so apparently it's a lot higher than our neighbors.
Yeah, so we generate something like, I think,
17%.
17% more. So a further opportunity for us as a town is to get to partner with the Recycling Commission, do kind of a community education campaign. There's no reason we should be putting out that amount of waste and paying for it. So there's not a good reason why Westford should be overachievers in waste generation. So it's been that way a long time. It's not a new problem, but that's something the Recycling Commission is eager to jump in on, and it's a savings opportunity. It's not something we can bank on right away because that's going to require behavior change, and that probably takes some time. But just so people know, it's a low-hanging fruit thing that just drives me crazy, but it's gonna take us a little while to get our hands around it.
Just in case people don't realize, we pay almost $100 per ton for everything that we throw away, in addition to the collection costs.
So,
And the recycling commission was meeting this evening to
Yeah.
brainstorm some ideas, so they'll be coming to the select board
just out of
soon.
curiosity, can we quantify what that 17% would equate to, just so everyone knows that?
Yeah, what's the 17% of the?
I'm just curious. If you don't have it, that's fine.
I'm gonna, let's see here,
It's
so,
probably about 1,200 tons, I wanna say.
Just so everyone knows, there's two
$400,000.
parts that are almost the same amount of money. One is the collection, what we pay the people to pick it up.
Yeah.
The other is the tipping fee, what we pay to get it.
I wanna say it's like 130,000-ish.
yeah, it's over 100,000, so, it's definitely substantial dollars.
So
And
that
that's
is
just-
something that the public can do.
Yeah.
Not, that won't necessarily help this year's budget, but by changing, by everyone changing our habits, we have the ability to impact.
It's 17% per person or 17% as a town
So
too?
the average per household is
The average
17% higher than the average for every other Massachusetts community that has curbside, collection.
And the difference is bigger than that for our neighbors, relative to our neighbors that have pay-as-you-throw, which is a different issue, but even just doing everything the same, we should be generating roughly a fifth less.
Is that curbside collection free for all those towns that you compare to?
It's a mix.
It's a mix.
Yeah, it's probably a mix.
I mean, many towns have the same situation that we do, so it's not that most towns are pay-as-you-throw, that's not the case.
It runs the gamut. I mean, there are towns that, are more similar to us, where we've got curbside collection that is not a fee, you're not paying a bag, you're not doing anything. And then there's, like Concord charges their residents for everything, so they have a 0 line item budget. So it
And there's other
runs-
towns that have pay-as-you-throw, but you have to go to the transfer station and dispose of your waste there as well, so it's really different and.
But those towns presumably generate less because they're incentivized
The-
to.
And the transfer station towns usually have less, because there's no collection cost, right?
Or the
So-
residents choose to hire their own private hauler.
Right.
And they're paying that.
Which
out
you
of their
wouldn't see.
own costs.
And the assumption is that pay-as-you-throw towns have less because there's this direct pay incentive, as opposed to the indirect paying it through your taxes.
Right. So I guess that would lead into, what was the thought process on not adopting a pay-as-you-throw, to kind of alleviate these budget stresses?
So I know I was opposed to it at the time, in part because it would have alleviated it from the tax bill, but we would, as residents, would have still been asked to pay the same thing. So it was just shifting the burden a different way.
Depends on how you do it, I
Yeah.
think. But Tom, what's the
So
select board's thought
Yeah,
on
so this
that?
has come before the select board. I'll say it is something that we're continuing to think about. In the past, because it's sort of a transfer of fees out of the town budget directly to the resident, we've been reluctant to use that as a budget fill. We felt like we should go to town meeting and ask for it as a vote, just like you'd ask for a tax increase. So I think we're still thinking about it in the context of this budget, because it's basically just a transfer of fees. It doesn't change the pocketbook effect for the resident. We haven't thought it was wise to bundle a pay-as-you-throw and a potential override. It seemed to us that, since that's just a transfer of cost from, you have to write 2 checks instead of 1 check, that wasn't something that made a lot of sense for us to do right now.
But I would argue that that's a true fee as opposed to some other fees we have, because you have control over it. I mean, I'm at a house, I've said this, just said it to somebody over here. I have 5 people, 2 cats and a dog, and I have 1 barrel that's never full, except for at Christmas, when we have an extra bag of wrapping paper. But you drive down my street and there's families with 2 or 3, and they've got 2 or 3 barrels out. So I see it completely differently, that you're not just shifting it to tax. You actually have an influence of how much you generate.
You're right. In aggregate, you are, but as an individual, you're not. So I agree with you. I think it's an active discussion, so I think that could be something that we bring forward, but we would want to do it in a careful way so that it wasn't just basically an on-the-fly way to generate more tax money by taking it out of the budget but collecting the same amount of tax. If that makes
Tom,
sense.
How would you see this working if we reduce, like we move to pay as you go, let's say that costs $1 million a year, would our budget base comes down by $1 million, or the budget base remains the same as a Prop 2.5 going forward?
Well, there's a couple ways you can do it. So you can also make it gradual, so you don't have to take the whole line item and pass it across. So in fact, one thought we had before we switched to E.L. Harvey, which is a huge win, and thank you to Christina for making sure we were diligent and followed up with Harvey. The idea there was there was going to be a limited size tote, and then anything beyond that, people would have to buy a separate bag to accommodate. And in that case, one way to think about it was maybe we would include the tote in the normal tax bill, but then charge for the extra bags. And many towns do that. So it's a common thing. So you can gradually do that. You can begin to charge a license for your tote, like a fee like you would for I don't know, any kind of other license fee that you have to renew annually.
A rental.
Yeah, you could do that, and then every year you could move it up. So it wouldn't have to be an all-at-once thing. You could be a split forever, or it could be a transfer over time. So there's many, many ways that we can skin this cat if we decide this is what's best for the town.
I would recommend Band-Aid approach than having a edict every year, which kind of make like, oh, they're changing every year and every year and every year, which kind of stings people for a long time, as opposed to, okay, we do it one policy change and then move on.
Yep, so I guess I would suggest we take that on board. A lot of this discussion sort of got not sidetracked, but sort of put on the shelf when we moved to Harvey, because Harvey will collect everything in the same way. And it was so much less expensive. We took the win and moved on. But I think it's a live issue, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an issue for a long time. It's unfortunate that it lands in this year, and people may think it's a budget win, but we toss a lot of stuff. I mean, it's been an issue for a long time.
I just want to follow up on that. There's one of the I had a follow-up question to one of the answers, and I only have the follow-up question in front of me, but was it $1,842,289 that would be the potential collection amount, leaving $760 still in the budget? Or am I,
It's about 1.8-ish. That was the amount that was listed from the waste management original amounts in the budget task force report. So
that's
now
the revenue
right,
we
so
would potentially get.
Typically for pay as you throw, it's only solid waste. So it's about 1.8-ish,
Okay.
I'd say.
Thank you.
One question, are the tipping fees stabilized, or are they still moving up?
They went up slightly. We're entering a new 5-year contract with Covanta.
But the actual blended value is going down, so that the market changes month to month. So we're seeing a downslide right now, which is great
For the recycling.
for the recycling costs. But yeah, the solid waste is up. Yep.
Okay. Anything else on solid waste? Can we move on to wastewater? Okay.
Thank you. So the wastewater budget, budget number 442, the proposed wastewater treatment budget shows an increase of $16,460, or about 6.76%. Increases in contracted services, sludge pumping and removal, and monitoring and testing services account for the majority of that increase. And we're recommending the same budget in both the override and non-override scenarios.
I just have a clarifying question, and forgive me if this has been answered previously. I'm sure it comes up every year. We have some wastewater treatment budget under this, and I believe we have some under the schools. Can you explain the split there? I believe it's a care and custody issue.
I think I can.
I'm hoping Mark can.
So, all right, so I think this is the answer. So this budget only deals with the 4 actual plants that are in operation throughout town, plus the center sewer system. But I believe some of the schools have septic systems that are maintained under a second under the school's budget. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so utility bills, they're paid for by the school directly. They're metered. They go right to the schools.
Okay.
So back, I want to say probably, 10 years ago at this point, DPW took over the care and maintenance of the wastewater plants for the schools. They're more equipped to handle it. And so we do have 4 plants out there that we do maintain. However, that is charged back during the end of year process to the schools to charge them back for it. So I will say that the Stony Brook plant, that actually services the neighborhood around the Stony Brook schools too, so only 30% of that plant is charged back to the schools. And for the Abbott, of course, all these town buildings are hooked up into it too, that goes down the center line, so we only charge back 40% of the operating costs for that, so
Okay.
it's a end of year process that you see behind the scenes.
Yeah, it was just the question because it lists school location, so.
Right, so I don't believe all the schools are connected to the plants. Like, for example, Nabnasset School is not connected to a wastewater plant, so we wouldn't handle them.
So I have a question for you on the your description of changes under 442. You mentioned it already that there was a increase in the contract on a sludge gun. I noticed that not just in your budget, this increase is not as large as some others in other parts of the budgets and other departments. I'm just interested to find out, when you do these contracts, are you regularly, do they regularly go out to bid? Is there a term of contract that they last for? And are the fees that are assigned to the contract set in the contract as well? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, so we do go out to bid. These contracts, they're a 1-year contract with two option years. Currently, we're with Natural Systems Utilities, and they were the previous contract holder. So yeah, we bid out essentially each line item, within the bid for a 1-year contract. And then based on their performance, we'll decide to go with them for a second year or a third year. And typically, the second year and the third year will incur a percentage increase.
Okay, now that's interesting. I was just going to say, as far as the practice is concerned, is it possible? I don't know what the state laws are on this, but I know in private industry, can you enter into, if you've had somebody that you worked with well, right, that you found was reliable, can you work into a multi-year contract with them where you would actually specify the increases during that contract? Is that something that, because it sounds like you're renewing these things every year and subject to extreme increases in rates. So I was just wondering, what's the feasibility of doing that?
I think it's possible.
We can enter into up to 3-year contracts. For
3-year
these type of
contract, right.
contracts. With solid waste, it's up to 5 years. And solid waste, you don't necessarily have to go out to bid. That's a state law. But these types of contracts are 1 to 3 year type of contracts.
Because what I've noticed in some of these is you're getting all these contracts coming in for renewal at the same time, which in a year like this can just be overwhelming. So that's something to look at. Maybe.
Right, so I think what you're saying is instead of setting it up as a 1-year contract with 2 option years, just put it out as a 3-year contract.
Yeah, stabilize it.
Yeah, that's definitely possible, doable. So, you know what, I mean, sometimes I fall prey to that's the way it's been done in the past, but it doesn't have to be done that way.
Well, we're looking for really innovative ways of, as he said, relieving pain,
Yeah.
so.
Anything else on wastewater? Let's move on to cemetery.
Thank you. Cemetery is the 491 budget. In the cemetery proposed budget, personal services increased by almost 5%, or about $7,900, primarily due to union contract and annual cost of living adjustments, and the addition of one additional seasonal labor position. Expenses in the budget decreased by 4.8%, or about $1,800, to reflect recent spending trends. Overall, the cemetery budget increased by 3.06%, or about $6,000. In the non-override budget, personnel services increased by about 0.5%, or $731. This includes contractual increases for union staff, but also includes the elimination of 2 seasonal labor positions over the the proposed override budget. Expenses are further reduced due to a decrease in the grounds maintenance line item that will result in fewer fertilization applications and seeding applications of the cemetery properties. Overall, the non-override budget shows a decrease of $3,126 from fiscal year 24 budget, which is a 1.58% reduction.
Sure, funny story, if you don't mind. I was having coffee someplace at one of our local restaurants, and an older gentleman told me that nobody dies here in Westford, so that's one of the problems. But if you want to find out where everybody is, you go to Florida and you can find out where they are. So that may be part of the budget problems that you're having on that account.
I have one that kind of doesn't pertain, but kind of does. When we had the presentation with the 26 and the 27 budgets, there's certain personnel services that aren't increased in those timeframes, and so, for example, there's one line item in here from an employee that's not increasing in those years. Is that because the increase is in comp reserve, and maybe the contract's not settled?
That's exactly right,
Okay.
yes.
I just want to make sure I wasn't assuming anything, and that we were going to be short. And then my question on this one, which is probably going to Dan, on that roll forward with the fair market adjustments
Yes.
to market value,
Yeah,
you can't spend the fair market paper increase, if you will, right? That doesn't count as investment income.
well, the auditors had us
I get
report
marking
back
to
to
fair
it, so-
value, but you
right.
can't spend that. You can only spend the interest payments you receive, correct?
Well, that's right. That whole chart was interest payments. So the principal that we have is in a separate fund. Actually, it's a different account. So I didn't even provide you with that because it's not expendable.
Okay, that's just the change, the
Yep,
net
so-
change in investments. That's
Yeah,
not.
exactly. So
Okay.
the balance there is all expendable.
Okay, I might need to think of, because I don't understand, like, if you have a decrease in fair market value, you obviously, if you expended it to zero the year before, you can't take that decrease, do you know what I mean? But we can talk offline.
Right. So if there's no balance there, it wouldn't be accruing losses or gains. It would just, we would transfer out the money from that account, and then it would stop, changing value because we would liquidate the asset and spend it. So we true up
But you
once a month.
can't liquidate the asset.
We would transfer it out of that investment account, the cash value, and so it'd come from that one line item for the expendable trust, and so it wouldn't move if it's a zero balance, so.
Okay. I think I got it. I'll have to look
Okay.
again.
We could
I
show
might-
you on actual paper if it's easier
Yeah,
at
I
some
might need
point,
to
but
think
yeah.
of it.
I had a question. So in the budget task force recommendations, one was to consider using some cemetery sale of lots or other fee revenue towards operating budget. Has that been thought about at all?
Yeah, so typically, the sale of lots has been used for expanding cemetery services. We just had a large one done a few years ago. So we used a lot of that account. So the expendable trust that we were just talking about, that can be used to supplement cemetery services. One of the issues is that the investment income isn't always consistent from year to year. It depends on rates and gains and losses within. So, but that can definitely be used to, it should probably be a planned approach on how to, use some of
Yeah.
that. You don't want to go out and spend all $70-some odd thousand
Right,
dollars
nope.
at once, but thousands of
No, I'm
dollars a
thinking
year could.
there are a couple of other communities that spend on the order of maybe $10,000
Yeah.
from those funds, routinely every year to knock down the operating costs a little bit.
And I think that would be a legitimate use to offset some of the maintenance costs, so.
There was also, so you said that, I'm sorry, did you have?
Well, I was just going to share. So at our last cemetery commissioner meeting last month, one of the agenda items was about 2 trees at Fairview Cemetery that are high-risk trees and need to be removed. And the commission ended up deciding that we would try and fund it out of budget, but if the budget were too tight to the end of the year, we would look to utilize these trust funds to fund that sort of activity.
So, just to follow up that, so you're almost treating that like the emergency reserve that
Sort of,
we just had
yeah,
to transfer
that's a good way
earlier today.
to phrase it, yes.
There was talk about adding a seasonal labor. Is that an additional position that's being added?
Yeah, instead of one summer helper, we'd have two, is
Okay.
what we're proposing.
So I thought we weren't adding any positions. I mean, I know that's not a full-time position, but I was just surprised to see an addition at all.
So the way it came about is, as I was looking at the budgets under the assistant director position, there was money in each of the budgets, park, cemetery, and highway, for seasonal labor. And I tried to match up the amount in each budget to what a 12 to 16 week summer would look like, and the amounts didn't jive at all. So I tried to get them to be, you know, a full employee, if you would. So that's why you saw the increase in this one, because it was, you know, it didn't fund an even number of employees in actuality.
Is it a net new hire? Or is
No,
it,
I
or is
don't-
it just that it showed up in this, but actually someone else lost one?
I think
That's a good question. I don't
reallocation.
recall overall. I can go back and look at my notes from
I-
when I put it together.
It'd be great to double check, just because I
Yeah.
think it's pretty important that if we say it's no new, there's really no new.
Yep, I can look into that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure, go ahead, Dennis.
One final question, with regard to, I know that you have several employee unions that you deal with as well. Your contracts with the unions, are they also for a period of time, like 3 years? Or-
Yes.
So is that the standard? Okay, that's standard. And I would assume that you provided direction to the folks as to what the parameters for the raises and things like that are gonna be? I mean,
Those were all negotiated last year,
okay,
so those were all laid out in November of 2022.
because I noticed that as a general, there are a lot of employee contracts that come due in the same year, which is another thing that, if we could try to stagger that, might be,
We have 5 that will come due
Yeah.
in 26.
that's a big hit.
I believe that was a directive 10 years ago.
Longer, yeah.
Longer.
Yeah.
So,
To stagger,
no, to actually line everyone
what?
up.
to sync them up.
And I think in part that there's kind of standard language in many municipal agreements that have a reopener if anyone else settles for something different in salary. You know, and I think you just open up a can of worms if you're settling every year with a different group.
Any other questions? I might have a couple, but no. So the impact of eliminating a seasonal laborer, what would that, again, can you give me an example of what that would really mean? Like, do we not mow the lawns as often, or what is that?
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of maintenance. The string trimming, mowing frequency, those kind of really unskilled labor tasks get shifted to the skilled staff. And so it typically happens less frequently.
How often are the lawns mowed now?
It depends on the lawns, if cemeteries, and it depends on the growth. Last summer, we were mowing almost daily on our properties. The previous summer, where we were in a drought, it was less often, but typically, you know, about once a week would be a typical mowing schedule.
Okay. And have we ever looked at using contracted services for any of the maintenance of the cemeteries?
I can't answer that. I don't know if you can, Dan.
For the maintenance, I'd have to look at that.
Okay. I'm gonna throw this one in here. I'm not exactly sure where this question lands, but one of the budget task force recommendations was to look at grounds maintenance across the town, because a lot of it's sort of split up between the school and the cemetery and parks and grounds, and there's probably other little pockets. So I'm not sure who that really goes to, if that has been considered or looked at all.
We have not started that investigation yet.
Okay.
I would add that cemetery and parks and grounds are under the same operations manager. They're both under the assistant director of public works, and the same operations manager is managing both groups. So they do work together. For example, pre-Memorial Day, we'll shift some of our parks crews to the cemeteries to get those ready for Memorial Day. and counter, as we're getting ball fields ready for opening day, we might shift the cemetery crews over to support that, so.
Okay. Forgive me for the, obsessing about the grass, but how crucial is it if you let it go a few more days? Is it really that big of a deal? I'm just trying to figure out, I know if my husband doesn't get out there, I'm kind of like, oh, whatever, I mean, or my son or somebody.
A lot of it is user expectations, particularly the ball fields. We will get, and we did last summer because of the craziness of the growth.
I guess the ball fields I can understand, because if kids are playing on the fields and, tall grass can get in the way, but on the common or in the cemeteries or, some of those other places.
Yeah, again, we hear complaints when we don't do it as often as people would like. Cemeteries are a sensitive subject for folks.
Right.
They're going to visit their loved ones, and they have a certain expectation of what the facility is going to look like.
So I guess if that's worth it to them, then they need to show up at town meeting.
Right.
It leads to the question, most private cemeteries basically have sort of like a perpetual care fund that people can donate to and things like that. Do we have anything like that?
Again, I defer to Dan.
Yeah, we do have perpetual care account, but it's not enough to, cover all the
Actually do the
operations
job,
of the
right.
cemeteries.
Is that the same account we were just talking about?
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
that's
the
the
one with
expendable
the
trust
one
for
that
perpetual care,
okay.
yeah.
One last question. Do you know if the rates of the cemetery have been analyzed recently, like the pricing of the burial plots and the, services?
I don't know if they have, but I can get back to you on that.
You said something about reducing fertilizer that would help with your mowing, but that's not my question. The seasonal staff these are people that are just kind of hired for the summer. Is that like, what kind of person is that? Is that like a college student?
Yeah,
or?
so typically, because we'd like to have employees that are 18 or older, they're typically college kids. And I regretted not including it in my responses to the FinCom questions. One of the great benefits that you don't see right off the bat is that it serves as on-the-job training for these folks that come work for us and become potential public works employees. They're industry-wide. There's a shortage of labor-type employees and skilled labor, and so in addition to the benefits we get for level of service, it's also providing hopefully a longer-term benefit to society to kind of fill these ever-growing need for skilled labor.
Can I interject real quick here? That's okay. I just wanted to say that one of our staff started off as summer help, and I believe Steve Cronin started off as summer help too. Not in Westford, but
Right.
where he came from.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Anything else to wrap up Public Works?
I guess just a follow-up item to make sure anything identified in the budget task force as an efficiency opportunity gets a follow-up with if needed, a multi-year plan. So I hadn't remembered that grounds care was one of them, cemetery fees is one of them. So our expectation in all of these sessions is that anything that's been suggested gets addressed, because if we're gonna go ask the residents to open up their pocketbooks, they expect us to show that we've been as diligent as we should be with their money, so.
Yeah, understood.
So I guess just if we, maybe at the last meeting or something, if we can just do a tally of everything to make sure everything's.
Yeah, actually, I circulated a spreadsheet to all department heads this week to have them
Okay.
start filling in where they are on that. So we
Okay.
should be in good shape by the end of this process. We already had some things started on the spreadsheet, but we'll have a really good tally of where we're at and where we project those items to fall in line by the end of this process.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay, thank you very much, Kyle.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kyle.
So we'll move on to library, and I see Ellen Rainville is ready. Good
Hi,
evening,
so
Ellen.
would you like me to start with a summary of the two different budgets?
Yes, I would, thank you.
So, the override budget, which is also the requested budget, carries forward our current level services We remain open 55 hours a week with 58 hours a week, January through April, our summer season. We retain 21.17 full-time equivalents, and this gives us a service year of essentially 314 days a year. When we look at the operating account, under the override budget, both in the override and the failed override budget, we're reducing utilities, electricity, gas, equipment and facility maintenance, which is typically a sizable line item in our budget. These are all held down along with custodial and janitorial supplies because we anticipate moving off-site to a temporary location in December of 2024, and we won't be needing those. We continue to analyze our printing and our processing supply budgets, which office supplies is a misnomer. These are reducing in both of our budgets, but in the override budget, the book and subscription line item remains high so that we meet our municipal appropriation requirement for the next fiscal year. So we are maintaining a certified library by meeting the 10 regulations under the Commonwealth of Mass regulations that pertain to certification. We're open more than 50 hours a week. We're spending 15% of our budget. We're spending 15% of our budget on books and materials. That 15% does not have to be completely paid for by the town. A mix of Friends funding, trustee funding, memorial book funding, and operating funding goes toward that. When we look conversely at the failed override budget, we are reducing our service week to 50 hours a week, making cuts 4 nights a week by 1 hour, and every Saturday by 1 hour. We're reducing our paging budget and our evening custodial budget. We are reducing overtime for custodians because we have fewer custodians, and we are additionally not offering Sunday service. This is a $68,000 cut across the personnel services budget. However, we are making one of our mandated certification levels, which is 50 hours of service for our population group. When we look at the operating budget under the failed override budget, we are reducing a number of line items, printing, processing supplies, custodial. We are holding down book and subscription costs. We are reducing mileage, we're reducing meeting and conferences, and we're reducing dues and membership. This is another $30,000 reduction, so that in total, the library budget is being reduced by $98,000 under the failed override budget, or about 5.48%. If we make our 50 hours per week, and if we make our 15% of our budget, which of course is now reduced by almost $100,000, we're making 2 of our critical certification levels. However, under the failed override budget, we definitely would have to apply to the Board of Library Commissioners for a waiver because we would not make the municipal appropriation requirement. And that is one of the 10 standards. Over a 3-year average, you take the 3 years of the most recent budgets, you multiply them by 2.5, and that computes the municipal appropriation requirement. So we do sustain services for 6 days a week. We do sustain our book budget, which is what we have always prioritized over hours because we have such a young community with such high rates of reading. We are continuing to circulate over 1,400 items a day, and in a full service year, that's 314 days per year. And we continue to see a trend toward more virtual use. I'm sure I don't have to tell this group that streaming is slowly replacing old genres and old formats. So more and more of our budget is going into e-collections, downloadable and digital collections, and those collections will be especially important, once we move off-site and there might be more remote use of our collections.
Okay, thank you.
2 questions.
Yep, go ahead, Dennis.
I have 2 questions, Ellen. The first one is, you mentioned that under the failed override budget, as you reference it, there's a issue that arises with the library commission. And what sort of a problem would that present for us?
So the municipal appropriation requirement is an incentive. And I want to make it clear that there are wonderful carrots in the library programmatic world in Massachusetts. When we stay certified, our residents of Westford can use the materials of any library in the Commonwealth. When we stay certified, we receive state aid to public libraries, which is about $48,000 a year. When we stay certified, we can receive state and federal grants. We've had regionalized services in the Commonwealth since 1961, and we've been in a network since 1984. So we are definitely centralizing, regionalizing, and sharing. But so those are all the carrots, but the stick is that we must meet these regulatory mandates, and we would need to apply for a waiver for the municipal appropriation requirement, because we would be, I think about $71,000 low, and we would have to fill out paperwork, take it to the Board of Library Commissioners, make our case, and then they would give us several years to work back to meet our correct level of funding. So that is the stick. The incentive is the ability to use all of the materials in the Commonwealth. We only have to cross the border into New Hampshire to not have that kind of reciprocal library service.
Okay. And just one last question, follow-up. In your library summary, you made a reference to the fact that there was a corresponding cut in state aid payments of 25%. Is this state aid payments specifically library oriented, or we're talking about general?
No, this is state aid to public libraries. If we meet these 10 regulations, we receive a population-based state aid. I have to say the Board of Library Commissioners has been very successful in advocating for an increase. At this point, Westford receives about $48,000 a year. If we make our hours of 50 per week, if we make our 15% book requirement, we would get our full state aid. We can miss one of those by 5%, and then we would have a 12.5% reduction in state aid. If we had a reduction both in hours and in our book budget, we would receive only 75% of our state aid.
Thank you.
Ellen, thank you. I'm just curious, do you have a sense of how many patrons on average utilize the library on Sundays? So how many that would impact?
Yes, we did do, we did take data last year, because ironically, I worked Super Bowl Sunday, and it was so dead. I think the whole world was at Market Basket buying snacks. it was so dead that I was convinced we needed to continue to take stats for the rest of the Sunday season. And Sundays are popular, but I have to explain. Now, typically we have 61 people an hour coming through the library. The issue with Sunday hours, not only are they our most expensive hours, but in order for hours to contribute to our state mandate, we must offer them 38 weeks a year. So at this point, Sunday hours, it makes sense for Sunday hours to be cut because they're both expensive. You have to heat the building for just 3 hours, and because they don't help us toward our hourly requirement.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm a little confused and wondering about what would be the loss if you applied for the waiver, especially as it relates to materials, considering at the end of the year you're going to move out. So would it be that many less materials to have to move?
It's not materials that we would be worried about. The Friends Board has made it clear that they will continue to help with library programmatic support during the course of the library building program. And they do fund about $60,000 a year of either materials, programs, museum passes, and other support to the library. So the municipal appropriation requirement is the combination of, it's our full salary and operating budget total. There are no benefits involved. And you take the last 3 years and you multiply the average of those 3 years by 2.5. We would then be put on notice that we would have 5 years to continue to come back before the Board of Library Commissioners to bring back our funding level.
I'm not sure I really understand how, would you not want to reduce some of that stuff so that you could move easier? Especially if some of it ends up in storage, like it says.
Well, it will be restored when we move back into our new building. Actually, this is a wonderful segue, Heather, because this is why we're holding down Sunday hours and not offering this year. It's an immediate action that the Board of Library Trustees voted to take because it impacts the municipal appropriation requirement for the next 3 years. So by holding down the budget this year, this year, fiscal year 24, we are holding down what the municipal appropriation requirement will be, and we're maximizing our ability to meet it during bad times.
So that's an actual, not an appropriated number that they use for that MAR calculation? Because fiscal 24 has already been appropriated.
So what that is correct. Municipal 24 was appropriated. However, we transferred less funding from the compensation reserve. That is what has held down the budget for FY24.
Okay. Dan?
Just to clarify, that was for the CWA contract, which closed after Jody's budget presentation last year.
Gotcha.
So that was in comp reserve.
Okay.
And because of balance strategies, we
You did
transferred less money,
Okay.
which impacts the MAR.
I understand that now. Okay. Heather, do you have anything else?
It's another question that kind of relates to that 3-year plan. It looks like the books and subscriptions aren't really changing. So I just want to make sure we're not understating what our 3-year needs are.
So the books and subscription need to be 15% of the total budget. The MAR is the total budget amount that needs to be increased over time. If you have a low year, which we could, being off-site, then it's easier for you to make your MAR in out years. But the 15% that we spend on books is different from the municipal appropriation requirement, which is the total budget expenditure. We should be able to make the book budget because of friend support and because as we spend less on utilities, we are upping the book budget so that we make the MAR.
But I'm not sure it's upping in 26 and 27. It's still at 249 both those years. So, but like, you know, I see like the personnel services increasing. So I kind of assumed that line item would increase.
So again, the 15% is being met by funds that are not in the operating budget.
Okay.
It's being supplemented, I should
Okay.
say, by funds that are not in the operating budget. And this would be the Friends Fall Appeal income, the Friends bestseller collection that they pay for. We're allowed to include museum passes because they're shared across the state. We're allowed to include direct cost of technology to our users, such as our hotspot monthly allotment and any technology such as direct public computers for public use and any public photocopier cost. So all of those together can be calculated together, added together to come up with the 15%. And I have a spreadsheet that is tracking these across 3 pages every single week.
I have a question on the Sunday hours, Ellen. So you said that the Library Board of Commissioners has already decided that the library will not be open this winter for Sundays, or no?
The Westford Board of Library Trustees, who oversee library services and policies, have made that decision as part of the budget.
Of the FY24 budget.
State level decision.
Right, no, yep, Westford. So
Right.
what is the estimate savings from closing those Sundays?
So it's about $18,000. So
And-
this was $18,000 that did not need to be transferred into the library budget from compensation reserve. That held down our budget this
Yep.
year as a form of budget retrenchment, and it has an impact over the next 3 years.
And that's just salaries? It's just personnel?
That's just salary.
Okay, so if I take that and extrapolate the 67,000 that you said you'd be saving if we closed early on weekdays and closed Sundays, and subtracted off the 18,000, that's $49,000. Is it $49,000 to stay open those extra hours on the weekdays,
All right,
or?
let's get my spreadsheet right now.
Okay.
So are you asking if we retain Sundays, it's between $16,000 and $18,000 in the budget. But again, because we only offer 4 months of Sundays.
Right, Yep, it doesn't go towards that, I understand. What I'm trying to get at is, what is the cost of the Sunday hours? And what is the cost of, those extra 5 hours, I think it is, staying open later on those other days? I'm trying to get that breakdown.
If you look at page 4 of the budget questions I answered, when we reduce 5 hours a week, we save $32,838 against the library assistance line item. When we close on Sundays, it's a reduction of $15,781. When we reduce our evening custodian, it's a reduction of $14,633. When we reduce paging, because they're paid minimum wage, there's a saving of $3,132. And because we have less custodial vacations to cover, there's an additional savings of $1,471.
Okay.
So all of those line items together are almost $68,000 of savings.
I don't think we have that breakdown, at least I'm not seeing that in my copy.
Came in late.
Today.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anyone have anything else?
Beth has her hand up.
Beth, go ahead.
So I guess my concern is, it sounds like we're gonna be able to retain the certification fairly, like hang on fairly without an override. So I'm concerned for future years because it sounds like this is gonna be an ongoing budgetary problem for the next 3 or more years. So I'm just wondering, you know, if we don't pass an override, we pass the non-override budget, and then the next year we have to do more cuts. You know, what's the ramification of that, and at what point do we lose that certification and residents lose the consortium resources? Is that part of the certification? And then my other question is, we're not looking at this here, but I know another town did not pass an override. They closed the library. They had to like repay grants to the state. So what is like our potential ramifications for the money that we've already received? Would we have to repay anything down the road?
So communities are given 5 years to work back from a waiver for the MAR. I believe there are at least 5 to 7 communities at the moment. The important thing about successfully applying for a waiver is that the cuts are not solely borne by the library, and there's not a disproportionate cut of 10%. So I think we would be making that, and then we would be one of several communities that would have 5 years to work back. Of course, if we have a budget that has a $98,000 cut in it, it's going to be much easier when we average 3 years together to make the municipal appropriation requirement. It's true, in 1993, the Drake Library entire budget was put on an override which failed. I think the important thing to know is that almost every community with a public library, you know, has a policy that they will not serve residents of non-certified libraries. So certification is important, but the MAR and the 5-year process to rebuild after a waiver and to go in front of the Board of Library Commissioners, and I think there may have even been a couple of communities that got extensions, that will, you know, that is a path that they want to maintain certified libraries in the Commonwealth. You know, there is not a desire to see libraries foundering, you know, especially a library like ours, which has had, you know, 7 positive votes on its library building grant and has an $8.6 million grant from the state. So we are, you know, this would be unfortunate, but the Board of Library Commissioners, the State Board of Library Commissioners, has a plan for us to work back. And even when we crest 25,000 population, we have 3 years to make the mandate for increased hours. So they do understand that in the municipal climate, things take time and they take multiple years in order to restore services or to expand services.
Okay. I had one last. Anybody else have anything? I'm done. You're done. Okay. Ellen, it sounds like a lot of the reductions in like printing services and office supplies are more to a shift to virtual. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So
that is correct. We did not, we've done no spending in the printing budget. Again, not spending money is good. We are now, we now have, the Friends have created a wonderful weekly e-newsletter. It has 2,000 subscribers a week currently with an over 50% read rate. And between that And there's a full page in Action Unlimited every day. WestfordCAT has hours at the library and is covering our activities. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have social media, we have our website. And so we are segueing to a non-print world, especially because most of the things that we hand out will be completely out of date as of December. I think that in FY25, once we know where we are moving off-site, we will do one giant postcard townwide mailing, but we're moving away from print, and of course, the more virtual items we purchase, there is no supply. You know, I could show you the spreadsheet that shows you how many barcodes we affixed every month and how many size 10 book covers and how many size 12 book covers, but we are moving away from many types of genres and formats that require containers and processing.
So is it reasonable to assume that some of those reductions, that the further reductions in the non-override budget could also apply to the override budget?
Yes, and they do actually. If you compare them to FY24, you'll see, Christina, that we have reduced them in both from FY24.
I'm just wondering if some of those line items could be the same in the override and the non-override budget. So, for example, the office supply line in the override budget is $97.50. It's $4,500 in the no override. Could it be $4,500 in both?
It could, as long as we're making our MAR, we can squeeze some of those down.
And the printing services, I think, are different as well. Maybe the postage, like some of those things I'm looking at, could we reduce those?
We could, and we are trying to move toward, it doesn't work for all of our users, but we're trying to move toward.
Well, and it's not zeroing it out, right? We're not zeroing it out. There is something there. It's just, we're just reducing it a little bit. Okay. Thank you. We done with library? Thank you very much, Ellen.
Thank you.
So we move on to Parks and Grounds, and Kyle is back up again.
Yes, thank you. So Parks and Grounds, budget 650. In this budget, personnel services increased by 2.67%, or about $12,000 due to union contract annual cost of living adjustments. Expenses decreased by a little over 7% to $39.69 to reflect, again, recent spending trends. Overall, the Parks and Grounds budget increased by 1.59%, or about $8,000. In the non-override budget proposal, the budget decreased by 0.84%, or about $4,300. This proposes the elimination of 2 seasonal labor positions and a reduction of $4,000 in the grounds maintenance line item. That cut would result in fewer fertilizations and seedings of recreation fields and town properties, as well as deferred maintenance and upkeep. Meetings and conferences for Parks and Grounds staff were also not funded in fiscal 25.
Do you have questions for Parks and Grounds? Okay, and we go to Ingrid.
I just had one. Where are we on moving towards kind of greener equipment, more electric or? Yeah.
So it's something we certainly look for. We do have a proposal in the capital budget for a new lawnmower. The equipment we have is more commercial, industrial size stuff. But I am working with sustainability coordinator Sue Thomas to look at other options and see if it's something that makes sense for the division.
Okay.
One of the comments, though, because we ask that at Capital all the time, is that they need to plug in the lawnmower when they need to be using it, because it only, I don't know, you can go into that if you want, but that was one of the issues. They don't have
the batteries don't last that long. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't done enough research to know that answer yet, but that certainly could be an issue.
Dennis?
Yeah, Carl, if you could just comment on regards to Parks and Grounds, the personnel services. I was just looking at these budgets from FY 2023 up through 25. There's significant increases in salaries between crew supervisors, park operations managers, heavy equipment operators, driving the whole total up about 47% over that period of cost. Could you just explain what those increases are related to?
I got this one. So,
Okay.
So in FY '24, we decided to move the entire salaries for those people into the Parks and Grounds department. Previously, 22 hours per week for those employees were within the highway department. So just for ease of administrative use, we just completely separated them.
Anything else for Parks and Grounds, Heather?
There's a big project coming at the ball fields. When does that come online? And would it be in this 3-year plan, and would those increases in whatever needs you have to maintain those fields be
So there's no
reflected here?
maintenance adjustment for that project in this budget. It's the Parks and Rec Commission meeting this past Monday. The commission voted to move forward with a phase 1 plan to present to CPC at their upcoming meetings.
Do you know when that would come online, when it would be done if it got approved?
I think likely it would be not this summer, certainly, probably next summer.
Why 26?
Yes. Yep.
I just don't know if maybe some of this might be a little light again. I'm just looking at the 3 years and what could potentially impact it.
I don't think there would be a dramatic change because the plan that's being proposed, the phase 1 plan, is fairly close to the existing footprint of the facility. Phase 2 is where you get additional fields and significant increase in acreage to the facility.
And how far out do you think that is?
We'll see how CPC goes.
Anything else? All right, I think we're good. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, Carl, it says here that your budget is supplemented by the maintenance revolving account that you receive every year. How much is in that? How much do we receive every year, that supplement for your Parks and Grounds?
Do you have that, Dan?
I don't have the exact balance at the moment, but I think it's upwards like 80,000 per year is put into that, and that's used to basically maintain the fields that the sports leagues use.
So that could be part of your budget, but that's part of the revolving account.
Yeah, it's constantly used each year too. So, but yes, we do use that.
Yeah, and the differential, so like if we're fertilizing, seeding the town common or the fire department facility, that would come out of this budget. If we're doing work on the athletic fields, it would come out of the revolving fund. And we keep track of where we use materials on which kind of fields to properly account for the use.
Does that revolving account cover most of the ball fields, or?
It does, yes.
And I assume that revenue comes from the
users.
like
User
users,
fees, right.
yeah. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Historical Commission, anybody have questions on that? Oh, Heather.
I'm trying to understand why some of our buildings are historical are in 199 and some are in 670. Like the Parkerville is in 199, but then the museum or whatever is in 670. Like, why the different thought process there?
That's a great question. It's just I want to say it's historical
How it's
data
always been,
we've
like,
done.
I just said.
Yeah, so it's what we've been doing. So. But we did centralize like the maintenance for the 2 and 4 Boston Road under the 199 building, and those costs have always just been borne under maintenance costs. So we never had a separate budget for the Parkerville that I can recall. So
Yeah, I just wondered if it made sense to kind of pull it out into the historical, just because, I mean, the other buildings are essential.
Does the Historical Commission have care and custody over the Parkerville?
I know the school committee used to. I'm actually not sure. That's a good question.
This is the Historic Commission, right? So that might be the reason of the split.
Right.
We'll check on that. That's a good question. But
Anything else? Okay, on to enterprises. Water enterprise.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Well, this one, I'm gonna give a brief intro and then
Brief.
please direct all questions to Mark. So the proposed water budget shows an overall increase from fiscal '24 of 21.35%, or about 1.027 million, in both the override and the non-override scenarios. Personal services increased by 3.72%, or about $50,000, due to contractual and cost of living increases and reclassification of 2 positions in the department. Expenses increased by 5.6%, primarily due to an increase in the transfer to the general fund to cover direct and indirect costs. Following hyperinflation on chemical costs last year from COVID, I'm happy to report that prices have stabilized, and we're recommending a decrease in that line item of about $57,000. Principal interest payments on issued bonds are projected to decrease by $61,000, or about 5.8%, and we have budgeted an additional $1.13 million in principal and interest for non-issued bonds for a number of proposed projects in fiscal '25, including the Francis Hill Water Storage Tank Rehab Project and the Forge Village and Nutting Road PFAS remediation treatment plants. Mark would be happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions?
One real quick. In one of the responses to one of the questions that was submitted, there was a reference to the PFAS fee eventually.
Sure, yes.
Do we know when, I mean, approximately when do you think that would start hitting water bills? And
I do.
approximately what is the order of magnitude that we're expecting that to be?
I'll defer part of that to Larry, but just bear with me for 1 second. I want to say FY '25, I don't know, FY '26. But something to note about that is just a proposal. The water commissioners have not, approved this yet, and we still have plenty of discussion remaining. But I do believe, Larry, it's FY '26. Is that correct?
Let me speak to that. Larry Panaro, business manager. Depending on when the project starts for the construction of the 2 facilities for PFAS, we could have temporary interest in fiscal year '25. Again, it depends on when we begin the construction. I have put that in the budget in terms of temporary interest. And if we go with a proposed PFAS fixed fee rate, very similar to the customer service rate, we would incur a small fee for that temporary interest. It hasn't been finalized yet, but the reason we want to go with a fixed fee approach is it's almost like a debt exclusion. That would pay for the debt on the construction of the PFAS infrastructure for the 2 locations, and it would mirror the principal and interest payments over the life of the PFAS loan. The good news is if we get SRF funding, we would probably get a very reduced interest rate, and that would lower the amount that I show in the projections. Because right now I'm projecting a 5% interest rate because I have to take the most conservative approach, not knowing if we'll get the SRF funding. Also, any money we get from the class action suit, it would be, what we would propose to do is to put that in a separate holding account and utilize that money to go against the amount of debt that we would need for the PFAS bond payments. So overall, I think we're in a pretty good position to lower the projections on the PFAS remediation fee in the future. And I think it's the fairest way to do it. Steve and I have agreed on that, the prior DPW director, and the majority of the water board also is leaning towards a fixed fee amount, because what we're doing is we're providing potable, healthy water by eliminating the PFAS. every account should pay across the board for the benefit of having healthy, PFAS-free water. So that's why we came up with that proposed recommendation. It's not final yet. It'll be up to the water board, and we would also have public meetings to present that in the near term.
Okay, do you know approximately, I know numbers are in flux, what the magnitude of that fee would be?
Yes, I have, based on my conservative estimates, if you just bear with me for a second. The proposal in 25 would be $7.65 per billing cycle, which annually would be $30 a year.
Okay, thank you.
The peak amount would be about $68 a year, or $70 a year, but that's assuming a 5% bond. If it's half that, it's going to be significantly lower.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I just seek clarification on that? So you would have the same fee, no matter water usage? So somebody like WA might pay the same fee as Princeton Properties as a homeowner?
Well, let me give you an example. Princeton Properties doesn't individually meter each of the units, but we have a multiplier. So in other words, I'm just using this as an example. If there are 200 apartments in Princeton Properties, they get 200 customer service fees, and they also would get 200 of these PFAS fees. That's how we do all the multiple unit locations. Someone like the 99 restaurant, they would pay the same PFAS fee that a resident would pay, because again, we're providing them with clean water that's drinkable with no chemicals in it. So that's how it would work. And that's how I came up with the rates, based on the number of customer service fees we have, as well as all the multipliers that we have for all the various large apartments.
I see Scott has his hand up. Anybody else from Finance Committee? But can I go to Scott and then I'll come back? Okay, how about go to Scott? Hazelton?
Yeah, I was just curious. So we just had a huge increase in water rates.
Scott, you just put yourself on mute.
Sorry. Yeah. So I guess what's the PFAS being on top of all those rate increases?
I can answer that. The 22% rate that was recently instituted was due to all the inflationary impacts of chemical treatment and all the other expenses that we've incurred over the last couple of years, as well as the fact that our water usage is significantly down. And the reason being weather variations. As you recall, last year it was a very wet year. We have to spread the costs based on our usage. So that had a lot to do with it, plus all the capital projects that we've incurred, which pretty much are a result of the master plan that we did. All those improvements have resulted in the increase of 22%. However, if you look at how long we went without a rate increase, I believe the average would have been less than 2% over the course of the number of years, based on, we hadn't had an increase in, I don't recall, Mark, maybe it was 13 years, I don't exactly remember.
I believe it was 2009.
Pardon me?
I believe it was 2009.
Yes, so, and I want to point out that once we finish the pilot test for the PFAS, there will be increasing operating expenses. Those are not in the budget. If you look at my projections out to 2030, once we incur those additional operating expenses, that will be put into the rates. It won't be put in, it has nothing to do with the bond. And we won't know that until the pilot test is complete. And I will also mention, this is an unfunded mandate. We have no choice, we must do this. And all other communities are facing the same thing.
Anyone? Dennis?
Yeah, a couple of questions. There's a increase, a sizable increase for non-scheduled overtime. Could you explain what that is? And the last question, is that unfunded mandate being directed from the EPA or the DEP?
It's coming from the EPA,
Okay.
and see what happens is once the EPA comes up with these limits, the DEP is going to have to meet or
Right.
exceed them. So it's coming from the EPA, the federal government.
I got you, thank you.
And so, sorry, go ahead, Larry.
Yeah, on the unscheduled overtime, that's a factor of the union contract. We increased it based on their percentage increase in their hourly rates.
And so what that covers is obviously off-hour emergencies, weekends, holidays, any sort of treatment alarms that come from the plant, things like that.
I see Andrea has her hand up. Andrea, you can go ahead.
Thanks. This is probably not for tonight, but it's an overall general question as we move forward. We've talked a lot about PFAS tonight, okay? And I've heard about we need PFAS fees in the future. You approved a reserve fund transfer earlier tonight because of PFAS and the pilot program. You know, Larry, with all due respect, when you were asking for your 22% increase before the select board, one of the reasons that you presented was the need to treat PFAS and the treatment plants. So my really big concern is that, do we have a handle on sort of what our expenses are going to be moving forward when we have to deal with this whole PFAS issue? It just seems to me it's coming in piecemeal. And that we're asked every other month for something to do with PFAS, and I think at some point in the future, and not for tonight, we need to sit down and figure out exactly what responding to the EPA mandates and to treating PFAS and to making sure we have clean and safe water, what that entails and what that's going to cost us as a town. So that's just a big picture item that I think we need to look at.
Just to answer that, I'll at least add one response to that question. The PFAS issue is part of the EPA mandates. EPA mandates were authorized by the legislature in 2009. The state of Massachusetts has the right to do away with EPA jurisdiction if they want to, but they opted to go with it. So that's probably part of the problem, or the large part of the problem. That's what drove our stormwater fees as well back a few years ago. Just a point of information.
Yeah, I don't see that as a problem. My problem is I want to see a plan moving forward as to how we're going to deal with this, and a global plan, and not feeling like we're dealing with this on a piecemeal basis.
Yes, we will do that, and it's important to note that the pilot study will determine the technology that we need to utilize in order to eliminate it, and the operating costs will be determined based on that pilot study.
Right.
And those are not in these numbers, so I just want to be clear about that.
No, I get it.
So we'll request an update at a time that makes sense. Sure. Once you've had a chance to gather the information you need. So we'll put that on a future agenda.
I think it is coalescing at this point. Like Larry said, once that pilot study is terminated, we'll know what direction we're going to take, and at that point, we're going to have a much better idea where we're headed.
Okay.
Anything else on water enterprise? Go ahead.
Real quick, what are the record supervisors, and is that in this column on your, if you need this I can throw it over there. I was just trying to trace all your different departments into this, and that's the one group I couldn't figure out.
Okay. Oops.
So there's 3 record supervisors.
I can also answer that as
Yeah,
well.
so
I'll let Mark answer.
What's the question?
So I'm just trying to figure out, what are record supervisors, and then are they in here?
Sure.
In the chart?
They're administrative personnel.
So the AP and
Yeah.
the payroll.
Correct.
And the billing person.
Correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, primarily, the 2 people in the water, there's 3 people, but they do the billing, and they do it water as well as stormwater. And they also do the collections and the cash applications and the customer service and the late payment process, as well as the leaning process, as well as the payroll process, as well as the stormwater late letter process and the stormwater leading process. It's a lot of work, there's a lot of accounts, and they do a terrific job, and
They do.
basically, that's what they do.
So it doesn't come through the town with like the property bills or that sort of thing. It's completely
No,
separate. So if I write a
it's-
check for both, it messes you guys up big time.
Yes. It does.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else on the water enterprise? All right, I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack.
So we'll move on to recreation enterprise.
Let's start with a big thank you for sitting through and,
Yeah.
and being here.
I was learning the whole time, so took it all in. I won't keep you guys, I know it's late. We'll be quick.
Can I just ask one question? They're the same as stormwater, right? But they're after her?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, Michelle's been sitting here for
No, I was just curious.
Okay, hi. Michelle Collette, Director of Recreation. I want to first start off by giving the override versus no override scenario. So the proposed FY25 budget with the override is $1,209,200,227. With the no override, it's a reduction of $15,000, which comes from the other recreation staff personnel services line. So that is the no override situation. As far as the recreation enterprise budget, just to give a brief overview of what that entails, the recreation enterprise budget funds the salaries of all recreation management and administration, program staff, direct costs of employees, benefits, health, Medicare, retirement, portion of indirect costs for operational support for other town departments, town manager, accounting, audit services, finance director, so on, insurance, unemployment compensation, comprehensive liability, excess umbrella liability, public official liability, all sorts of liability things. Overall, the FY25 budget decreased on the personnel service recreation supervisor line is due to the WPC program registrar coordinator position that was not filled after it was vacated in 2023. The other recreation staff line that is being reduced provides the funding for the hourly part-time staff who support our three most significant programs, which is Destination Exploration, Kids Club in the summer, and our large WPC after-school program. As far as overall expenses, they are decreasing by $66,000. This is due primarily to the decrease in the direct and indirect expenses of $54,636. The staff has been decreased over the past few years, so the indirect and indirect costs are decreasing accordingly. The other lines that were also decreased as we compare the budget trends to FY23, which is the first full year programming without the disruption of COVID. The other recreation staff is reduced by $15,000 without the appropriate funds. One of the impacts could be challenging to hire the necessary staff members to run programs impacting enrollment, quality of services, and the department's ability to stay competitive in and around Westford. Reduced enrollment means reduced revenue. Just a quick overview of some of the potential reductions that it may affect. It may affect us to remain in compliance with EEC licensing, requires a multi-leveled staffing structure. Each site must have a site director, a site leader, a group leader, and a defined number of counselors based on enrollment. Effective and compliant staffing schedule must take into consideration the ebbs and flows of enrollment and staffing availability. The recreation department must be prepared for potential increase in enrollment for both WPC and summer weekly programs. The ability to hire a larger percentage of experienced adults to help manage the programs more effectively, which also provides more flexibility regarding EEC compliance. Preparation for annual step increases, as there will be no shift in the current minimum wage increase. And continued improvement of the summer beach experience for both residents and non-residents who visit two of Westford's important resources, Edwards Beach and Forge Pond Beach. Our summer weekly programs and swim programs also utilize these facilities. So that's a little bit of what the no, without the override would affect. For personnel services.
Go ahead, Tom.
All right. Just because you mentioned WPC, are the fees not keeping up with the expenses to keep running that program? Like in a vacuum, could you run the WPC program in and of itself?
Well, considering that we have to pay into all the other indirect costs, that's probably would be challenging for it to cover all of those expenses.
Okay.
So it's not covering its costs?
I believe that the program is covering its costs, but with having to, if we just stood alone, and I'm doing an analysis on that as well. I'm working on that. But the programs are covering their costs, as we are now.
With the exception of the direct and indirect.
With the exception of the indirect costs. Correct.
Well, okay. Go ahead, Heather.
I think maybe we need to, I know you started giving us information on some of the programs and whether they were break even or not, but I kind of almost think we need to reconvene when that project's done, and it is in support of the budget task force, because I feel like some of the comments I might want to make, I really need to know.
Yeah, and we just got some of the data this afternoon.
And I'd like to also add the utilization of that. So like if you're at Chris Foley with the after school program, is there room for 20 kids, but you only have 11? So I'd like that incorporated into it as well, if possible.
All that data is available. Obviously, there's a lot of it, and I definitely need some more time. I definitely made a dent in it. Some of the data that I had sent over earlier was just kind of a little show and tell of what, the work I have to do to get meaningful numbers, to make it all make sense and give you guys, the figures that you're looking for.
Can I ask one quick question on what was already provided? I'm looking at the after-school cost comparison that you did, so thank you, which benchmarks other communities. So I just wanted to make sure we're looking at apples to apples. So the other after-school programs, that's the monthly cost?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and you bring a good point up, apples to apples. It's definitely not apples to apples.
No, well, none of them are going to be, so.
That's another, something that I want to take into consideration as well. There's so much background details that go along with this. For the most part, when programs present their after-school programs, they'll give, a monthly rate. Some of them, and for example, they take the whole year and divide it by 10 months. The way that we run it is something different, where we divide it up into 5 sessions, and depending on the number of days in that session, we calculate a by day. So it'd probably make more sense to see more clear what it would be per day.
Yeah, per day or per week or something.
Because month, you could say $511 a month. Well, what month is that? Is that January with 4 weeks? So
and
there's a lot of division and vacation.
Right,
because
I'm looking
weeks and all that.
So it is. So you put $210 a week for recreation.
Yeah, that's
what kind of.
That's a ballpark. If you were to really do it a week, $210 a week.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just assume 4 weeks in a month.
Yep.
So so then that's 840
correct
a week, a month. Okay, which is a lot more than some of these other programs. for 5 years?
Yeah, if you,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. But I agree with Heather. I think I'd like a little more time to dig into some of the data.
Michelle, what does EEC stand for?
Early education and care.
And what
So
agency is that? Where is it
That's the
located?
state of Massachusetts, early education and care licensing, organization. So, I have a licenser that I work with, whom I have to stay within compliance of loads and loads of regulations, from ratios to supervision to, snacks provided.
So they mandate all that for
They
you?
mandate all of that.
Yeah.
It's the same group as that does childcare.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, a childcare center has to follow this, basically.
At any point, any of these budgets put the compliance at risk?
Say that again?
At any point, the budgets you have provided will put the state compliance for our WPC at risk.
Are there complaints?
No,
The
compliance.
compliance,
Do the
does the
budgets
budget,
you put forward put our compliance at risk?
Not really. As long as I maintain a certain ratio of staff per children, you know, I can regulate that, you know, making sure that I'm staffed accordingly to the number of children.
Okay.
And of course, the more children I have, the more revenue I bring in, but there's also a certain amount of staff that has to comply with those numbers.
And would you have any skills problem or availability of staff problem, or anytime you want few extra caregivers, you will be able to get?
Yes, and I, you know, to get it a little bit more detailed, I do move staff around, so, you know, I rob Peter to pay Paul, you know, I take one from one program, hey, how many kids you have? So, you know, I navigate that very well. I'm very good and used to doing that, which also keeps, you know, our expenses, you know, lower in the personnel services when it comes to the other recreation staff.
Okay. Thank you for that.
They're my hourly, like, the hourly staff, seasonal staff that come and go throughout the year.
So I believe that would also depend on where you need more staff, the availability of. If you needed a
That's
site
change
supervisor,
in-
it's harder to
Correct.
fill a site
Correct.
supervisor on a
Correct.
moment's notice as opposed to just
Absolutely.
a counselor.
Yes.
That's the daily juggling.
Yes, and the demographics of Westford in general, I mean, the schools from their, you know, their number of students they have, and then, you know, it's a reflection on the number of students I actually have, you know, in some of our programs, depending on what school.
So, Michelle, when we talked this summer during the budget task force, we noticed that most of the communities do not run something like, like we have our WPC out of their rec department. They're usually run out of the schools. And have you been able to look at that at all and see, is there any advantage to doing that? What's the difference? Are they still under the same EEC requirements, or?
So I'm looking into that as part of my data collection, like, okay, what's a school, you know, the public school running as opposed to, you know, a rec department?
What's WPC stand
Mo-
for?
Westford Partnership for Children. Most of the programs that I interact with and talk to are through recreation departments. Again, that's something that the data that I am collecting, you know, what towns in that market basket run through their school department and run through the rec department. What was your?
So I'm just wondering, is there any sort of a difference between running it through the schools versus running it through the rec department? Because we are unique in this sense. We're the only ones that I've found running an after-school program through rec.
I'm not sure that we're that unique about it. I see that there are a lot of after recreation departments running their after-school programs.
So not on our market baskets.
So again, I can, you know, look at that data and collect it. I don't have a real straight answer for that right
Sure,
now.
okay.
I don't know what the benefits are.
So I think we are gonna need you to come back at some
Yep.
future meeting with
Absolutely.
all of the information that we had originally asked. I think the one comment that I want to make is also in the budget task force there was a recommendation, sort of maybe the select board needs to have some kind of sort of a policy discussion on how much of a subsidy should be going to the rec enterprise, given that it is an enterprise fund.
Yeah, so I understand that, so it definitely needs to come back. I'd be very interested now, so Dan has educated me a little bit more that because they basically absorb overhead from the rest of the town, the subsidy isn't quite the subsidy that it seems. We're sort of subsidizing it, but then they're also absorbing about that amount of overhead elsewhere in the town, so it's a little bit misleading, I think, in the way that the numbers come out. So I think I'm interested in seeing, on a direct cost basis, which programs cover themselves.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be interesting to see the numbers with the overhead absorption split out so we can see what that looks like. Because it's a straightforward equation. If we've decided for some reason to absorb overhead that way, if the net contribution is more than the overhead absorption, then it actually is a positive. Like, we'd lose money if we stopped doing it.
Right.
And so I kind of like to see it all laid out in a way that's easier for me to read and understand.
Sure.
And in particular, I'd like to see, I think the thing you may decide to not do, or you at least want to have a conversation about, is if there are slices of programs at particular schools or elsewhere that are not covering their own direct costs. Then I think we have to ask, does it make sense for us to continue to do that? Or do we have to let people know there's a minimum? Or do we have to say, yeah, here's the threshold that all these different school programs have to meet for us to do this, and if the school can't generate the volume, then we're not going to do it because the economics don't work. So I'm sort of looking at Dan, but Dan, do you understand what I think we need? Okay.
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Because the major difference that I found when I was working on the budget task force is because this was run, because our after-school programs in particular are run through a rec enterprise, you are responsible for benefits for these employees. So those really stood out, right? That's like an extra cost, sort of, which could have been hidden in the schools, and maybe you couldn't see that. But if you take all that into consideration, you're not covering your costs, right? Like you've got the extra costs for health insurance and all that kind of stuff. All the other rec departments in the market basket towns had a small handful of employees, 1 to 3. That was it. Everybody else was paid out of a revolving fund, and it was covered 100%. So that's what I'm looking at. But again, the big difference was I don't think any of those other towns were running an after-school program. So that's what's kind of clicking in my head as to there's a difference here.
Yeah, because I mean, the schools have, the set revolving accounts for before and after care.
Right.
And so, and benefits would be generally paid out of that as well.
And they're covering themselves, though. That's my
through
point.
the fees. I mean, it depends. I'm sure every district and town's different.
But there's probably also a split, right? Like some of those people also work in the schools, so they're working a few hours
Right.
under this program, but it's still that same person getting benefits across.
Right. So I know,
an
like
8-hour day
in
or
the district
whatever.
where I am right now, previously we ran our own through the schools, and yes, so learning assistant who has a job, in the schools during the day, then would work 3
So that would be
hours
substantially less expensive
Yes.
than having a separate person. So that's the other thing to look at is, for a given school, what do the economics look like for Chelmsford if they do it this other way? Because you're right, if they're using people they're already paying benefits for and just paying a couple extra hours at their hourly rate, that's gonna be a lot cheaper.
Yep.
And so it's just a choice, like, is it somehow better what we're doing, or is that a more cost-effective way to do it?
Yeah.
So Dan, if we could, I don't know, is it easy to pick one school that does it the other way and just ask them to give you the economics? And
Just a question, this line item where it says direct and indirect costs, is this what's being affected by?
That's like the health insurance and yeah.
Well, and I mean, I should probably know this, Dan, so sorry. Because remember when we started the enterprise fund, there was, remind us maybe of the rationale, because when the rec department used to just be a town department, you know, then it didn't have this balance of paying the overhead because it was all part of.
That's right, because there's a 53.5 revolving account, but that, when it grew and, you know, the program became more popular for the after school, it exceeded the limit that the state allowed
Oh,
at the
okay,
time.
that's what
And so we had to establish an enterprise fund if we wanted to keep it out of the general fund.
Okay, thanks.
John, do you have a question, John?
Well, I just, you know, you say that the WPC is not in the middle schools? Was it ever in the middle
Yes,
school?
it was,
Why'd they take it out?
because we weren't covering our costs. It was actually costing us money to run the middle school program. There wasn't enough interest of middle school children to keep up with. It was at one school, so one of the most expensive things was the transportation from one school to the other. Not only that, but after COVID, I lost a lot of my staff, and to try to find someone, to rehire someone just to run a middle school program, and finding the right support staff for that middle school director, given the time of day that middle school gets out, it was hard to get a high school kid, because they got out, by the time they got out of school and got to the middle school program, I would be out of compliance. I'd have one person over there, you know, so to find the appropriate staff to run the middle school program effectively, that was very challenging. And the busing, started to bus only over like maybe 2 or 3 kids from the other middle school, and the expenses were just too high to maintain that program. So we decided to close it and let me focus on the K-5 schools.
So who provides that service to them now?
They do not have, middle school does not have a service for after school.
You look at the deficit, what the town contributes to the enterprise fund, how would you close that gap? Are you hamstrung by facilities that you can use, or is there some reason, some way that you could close that gap? Increase fees, or how would you do that?
I mean, increasing fees is always an option.
Yeah, but it's not a good option. But
No, it's not a good option, but, you know, we do take a look at that, and we do make sure that we do small incremental raises throughout the course of, you know, years.
If you had more facilities available to you.
If I had more facilities available, well, we'd have to still find the appropriate
the
staff to safely manage and run essentially a child care program for middle school children.
It's kind of interesting looking at your competitors, Road and Bush, Kids League, Good Pickin' Farm.
Yep, yeah. That has also grown over the last 4 to 5 years. There was also a time where Road and Bush was closed while they were doing renovations. So I believe we may have seen the benefits of getting those children, you know, before.
So we're in a sense subsidizing one of your competitors.
By leasing space.
By leasing at a discount.
Oh, well,
Leasing at a very high discount space for
them to, yeah.
That's a zone. That's a zone issue.
Yeah, I know, that's another issue, but okay, thank you for what you do.
Yes.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, we appreciate the hard work you do.
It seems like.
We're sorry you're kind of coming under this scrutiny, but this is just
It's
the
okay.
world we're in. Yeah.
I just want to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
Mission accomplished.
It's a lot of work. It's definitely a lot of work, you know, but
We appreciate
we have a
it.
good benefit to the town and our after
So we'll
school
refine the
program.
data and get back to you.
Yeah,
It's getting
definitely.
late, but we'll have you back to,
Absolutely.
I have one more. Dan, you were talking about looking at what other districts do for that recreation.
Yep.
Acton's got a super program, Acton Boxborough, because I know the lady that runs it.
Okay.
So she's retired, but they seem to make money. I don't know how, but that might be one you want to take a look at.
It's a front.
They might be the only gig in
left.
town too, you know?
Yeah.
There's other gigs in town.
There's nothing else to do in Acton. No,
Yeah.
we'll go to Stormwater. Thank you so much,
You're
Michelle.
welcome. Have a great night.
Sorry you
Thank
had
you,
to
you
wait
too.
so
No,
late.
it's all right. It's all good.
last but not least.
First and last.
And in the middle.
All right, stormwater, 650. For the stormwater budget, we're proposing the same budget for both scenarios, override and non-override. Overall, the budget is proposed to decrease about $52,000 or 5.07% from fiscal '24. Personal services expenses decreased by $4,200 or about 3.4% from the prior fiscal year due to the elimination of stipends through position reclassifications. And expenses decreased by about $52,000 or 5% from the FY '24 budget as a result of reductions and adjustments to several line items to reflect actual costs realized over the first 4 years of the stormwater enterprise.
Questions? Do we still throw 600 at it from the town budget?
Yep.
And then also just circling back to those records supervisors, you don't need one in this budget?
We
Or
don't.
is that filtering through indirect, direct?
How it gets
Okay,
accounted for,
okay,
I'm not sure,
okay.
but the water supervisors take care of this as well.
Okay.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay.
Just a kind of clarifying point on the title of record supervisor is a union title. Right? It doesn't reflect necessarily what they're actually doing.
Function?
Yeah.
It's basically a payables
I
clerk.
mean,
Depends on the specific person, but yeah.
Tom, Larry Canaro, you're absolutely right. Those titles that have been around because of the unions, but they do not reflect what they do. In my opinion, they should be changed, but it's a union issue. I agree.
When does the select board discuss new rates? When are we coming up on the 3 years? Wasn't it 3 years?
I think it's very
It's been
soon.
3 years.
Soon. Do we have a sense of what those rates are gonna do?
I can speak to that. I think the rates are adequate for now. I mean, I'm basically doing the financial aspects for the stormwater enterprise. I think they're fine for now. I do think we need to build the reserve so that we can do future capital out of the reserve rather than borrowing money, because obviously you save a lot more money. We should eventually get it to the point like we run the water side, which is to build up that reserve so that you won't have to do as much borrowing in the future. No, I feel it's adequate, and depending on the projects that come in the future and, you know, what engineering feels is necessary, we'll look at the rates, but I think they're fine. We have revenue numbers that show the reserve that was sent through the budget process. We could go over that if you'd like.
Follow up on that real
Sure,
quick?
go ahead.
I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I would caution against just fine for now, and then, 10 years down the road, hitting us with a 25% increase. I would like to think that may be a lesson that was learned, to try to project out an incremental, much smaller increase that is easier to digest. Not necessarily this year, but just something going forward as a kind of directive to don't just sit on, oh, well, we're keeping rates the same, and then all of a sudden we can't.
Well, I agree with you 100%. And you don't want to change rates every year. You don't want to change them every other year. You want to do them in a 3 to 5 year period, which makes a lot of sense, Tom. The reason we didn't do it in water, first of all, we were basically instructed not to do increases for a while, and then we came upon a perfect storm. And the perfect storm was the weather. It was the decrease in our permit, as well as the inflationary period. It was unavoidable, and we went through all that for fiscal '24. But I agree with you 100%. We want to do it more often, but in 3 to 5 year periods.
For whatever is worth, I completely support him. We should not give any shocks, like especially the big bumps, as much as we can. make them less frequent, as you said, but smaller changes or smaller increase in fees.
Anything else for stormwater?
Yeah.
John?
How much did we actually get from the fees this last year?
I can answer that.
It should be going up. We've got a few developments.
In 2023, we ended up, you can correct me if I'm wrong again, I think 900,000 or something like that. In 23.
Were we looking
And,
for? Yeah.
the projection in 24 is to get, hold on, just bear with me.
So those bills just came out, so you should
Yeah.
have the.
I haven't even opened mine, but anyway. What was our target? Was our target $1 million or was it 600,000? I know our target was to have $600,000 from the budget, and then the rest of it was from the fee.
Yeah,
And we had a target.
Yeah, the target was more like 1.1 million or so.
1.1?
Yeah,
So
and on
we're a
top of
little short
that,
of that.
600,000 from the general fund for.
Okay, and so and our total budget is, what, $1.5 million?
I have the numbers, it's $1,157,766 is what was billed out in 23, and I'm looking at about the same number in 2024.
So we're getting
And,
1.1.
the collections are running behind, and I'll tell you why. I mean, we need to change the schedule of how we do the billing. I've asked the chairman, Kristen and I have talked about it, that we want to meet with the board chairman as well as the water board chairman to talk about, I mean, does the board of selectmen want to continue to run stormwater, or do you want that to be done by a stormwater board? It's up to the board of selectmen, but the schedule does not lend itself to collecting the money in a prudent way. And the leaning process is always done in November, and the way we do the billing doesn't lend itself to that. So I would like to propose changing the billing.
Let me ask you a question. When you said that 1,100,000 and something thousand, was that what you were gathered from fees?
That's what was billed out.
That was billed.
That was billed
That's
out.
what was billed out, but we
For
don't
1 year.
collect that all in the same year.
Well, that's the whole
First
budget.
of all, we don't charge any interest. It should be charged, it should be 30-day payment terms, just like the tax bill, just like the water bill. If it's not paid in a timely fashion, we send out late letters, and then we try to collect it as soon as we can. But there's interest charges, which have not been done. Again, I was not involved in the whole setup of the stormwater enterprise. It was done quickly, and I think the treasurer did a lot of good work on there to try to get it off the ground. But it's basically like the way the tax bills go out. For example, the average residential stormwater bill is very, very low, $75, I believe it is. But you have the option to pay it off in 2 payments. We send out extra money in postage, envelopes, the whole bit. It should only be sent out once a year.
This hearing.
When
Anyway.
these is just
Larry,
Yeah.
why don't we can bring this up at another time.
Yeah, this sounds like a policy
Yeah.
question, Larry, so why don't we address this when we get together and talk about stormwater?
Yeah, one more
Okay,
question.
sounds great.
One more question. Staff engineer, have you been able to fill that position?
We haven't.
Have you taken a look at the workload? Do we really need that? We've been able to get this, continue doing the stormwater. We've got, 50 miles of road that really falls into this stormwater?
Actually, I'm not sure how much of the town falls into the MS4 program. What I can say is we aren't meeting all of our commitments for the MS4 program, largely because we don't have that extra position. The stormwater mapping is incomplete, for sure. Figuring out where all our drainage outfalls are, those kind of program items in the MS4 program. We are falling somewhat short on that, but meeting the expectations of EPA. Additionally, the workload is falling on the assistant town engineer, which keeps him from doing other higher level tasks on our other projects. So the work is getting done to what needs to be. but behind the scenes, there are things being deferred because the position is not filled.
Thank you.
No, there's engineering firms that can maybe fill. I know it would be more per hour.
I don't know if it's been looked at for this,
Okay.
but there are a number of items we do use contracted services for.
Didn't we have a capital project to scope out all the drainage and culverts and stuff like that?
There's are you referencing the culvert study?
Yeah,
The
maybe
condition
that's it.
assessment?
Yeah.
Yes, that has been completed.
But that wouldn't, you would still need the engineer to, whatever you just said about mapping out the culverts.
Yeah, so the GIS mapping of the actual location of them all, they're not all perfectly mapped at this point.
So that's kind of the same project, but not really.
Exactly, yeah, different components of it.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else for stormwater? We wrap it up? Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks,
Okay.
you.
Just an observation, before we go. I mean, what I'm seeing here is, and these enterprise accounts are, I think, are gonna end up causing us a lot of trouble over the course of the time. Because what happens is, they're beginning to multiply a bit, and they're beginning to, and a lot of times what happens is, it's, especially when they're mandated, it is like as Kyle just said, it's starting to divert the actual direction of where the overall department sometimes should be going. So I think we have to be careful about those. I mean, they're out there and everything else, but, we'll be talking about ambulance and everything else. They're impacting the departments, and we need to be able to be aware of that. And whenever you have confusion about priorities, because they're being driven, you're gonna have cost increases, and you're gonna lose administrative control over a lot of the expenses that you're doing. So it's not this deliberate, it's just they have a tendency to go on their own. So we just wanna keep that in mind.
Okay. All right, we're gonna go on to approval of minutes. You guys can stay if you want, or we'll see.
I think we'll probably see you soon.
Yeah, I'll see you next week.
I'm gonna stay. I wanna stay there.
So, did everyone have?
Andrea, I think Andrea's.
Oh,
Tom, you
Andrea?
need
No,
a
actually, I
motion.
think I may
you
go.
You need a motion
Motion
to
to
adjourn the select board.
Can I have a motion? And a second? Okay, all in favor, John? Aye. Scott?
Aye.
Andrea?
Aye.
Chris, if you're out there? I'm an aye, so it's 4.
I think you're gonna go through all your assignments, aren't you?
Thanks. Thanks, Select Board. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, did everyone have a chance to look at the minutes, the December 19th minutes? Or do we wanna push those off? Let's move those to the.
I don't have a problem with that. I like the way this is moving.
Yeah, we can skip the board and committee updates.
Motion
It's just
to
kind of
adjourn?
Yeah, I just want to take a look at the future meetings, but yes, I will take a motion to adjourn.
She just made it last second.
Okay, perfect.
Well, look at them.
Roll call.
We have to do roll call, so all in favor, Ingrid?
Aye.
Aye.
Boy, you guys have got sauces
Right.
on this good.
Heather? Dennis?
Aye.
Aye. Tom?
Aye.
Me? Aye. Shelby?
Yeah, we're not gonna talk anymore.
And Beth?
Enough.
Okay, we are
Spending
adjourned.
too much time.
It doesn't have to be
You're
unanimous.
right.